Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this What If story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by Sesake on Wattpad. Now let's start. Izuku stood atop a tall building, gazing at the No.1 hero and his idol, All Might. He wondered if it was possible to become a hero despite lacking a quirk. He expressed his longing to be a hero like All Might, despite being an ordinary kid without powers. All Might turned to the young boy, but before he could respond, he felt a sudden pain, causing him to bend over as smoke began to rise from his body. He thought to himself that this was not the right time or place for such a moment. Izuku continued speaking, sharing his experiences and his unwavering dream of becoming a hero. He wanted to be someone people could look up to, just like All Might. When Izuku finally looked up, he was taken aback. The figure before him was not the All Might he admired, but a frail shadow of a man. After a brief moment of panic, All Might managed to calm Izuku down and explain the necessity of keeping his condition a secret. He then addressed Izuku's question directly. All Might explained that pro-heroes often faced life-threatening situations, and some villains were simply unbeatable without powers. He told Izuku that, unfortunately, he could not become a hero. The words struck Izuku deeply, shattering his hopes. All Might continued to speak, but Izuku felt detached, merely nodding in response. As All Might walked toward the door leading downstairs, he advised Izuku that while dreaming is important, it's crucial to ensure those dreams are realistic. After All Might left, Izuku remained on the rooftop for a while before collapsing to his knees in tears. After a few minutes, he stood up, walked to the edge of the building, and set down his backpack. He reached inside and pulled out his hero journal, filled with notes from observing professional heroes. It now felt like a painful reminder of his perceived failures. With one last glance, he tossed it off the side of the building and grabbed his bag, heading home. On his way back, Izuku recalled the hurtful things people had said to him over the years, how he was useless, unwanted, and would never amount to anything. Even his own mother doubted his potential to become a hero. Earlier that day, a so-called friend had cruelly suggested he jump off a building and hope to be reborn with a quirk. Stopping in his tracks, Izuku thought about how he should have acted on that suggestion while he was up there, but he quickly dismissed the idea, reminding himself that it wouldn't be fair to his mother. He continued walking, consumed by his sorrow. As he walked, he passed an electronics store displaying a TV showing a disaster unfolding near the building where he had just spoken with All Might. He was about to turn away when he spotted the sludge villain who had attacked him earlier, now using 𝐒𝐿 as a hostage. The villain had somehow escaped All Might and was causing chaos. As Izuku watched, he noticed a troubling reflection in the window. He was smiling. He felt a surge of happiness at 𝐒𝐿's suffering and the destruction around him, realizing that for once, 𝐒𝐿 would experience what it felt like to be weak and powerless. This realization filled him with disgust. Shaking his head, he walked away, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. When he finally reached home, he hurried to his room and sat on his bed, trying to sort through his thoughts. He continued to wrestle with his feelings during dinner and afterward, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't understand why he had felt joy in witnessing the chaos. Finally, he decided to take a walk to clear his mind. He put on a jacket, hoping to escape the turmoil in his thoughts. As he walked, he realized he had lost track of where he was going and found himself back at the building from earlier that day, memories flooding back. He whispered to himself about how messed up he felt, contemplating the darkness within him. Just then, a voice interrupted his thoughts, asking what the point of such thoughts was. Startled, Izuku turned toward a nearby alleyway and saw a man dressed in a bartender's outfit, his form resembling black smoke. The man introduced himself as 𝐒𝐮𝐲 and expressed a longing to speak with Izuku. Though hesitant, Izuku listened as 𝐒𝐮𝐲 assured him he meant no harm. After a moment of uncertainty, Izuku agreed to follow 𝐒𝐮𝐲 through a portal that appeared beside him, stepping into an empty bar with stocked shelves and a few couches. In the center stood a pale young man with striking scarlet eyes, wearing a black long-sleeve shirt and covering part of his face with a large hand. As Izuku took in the scene, the young man addressed him with disdain, questioning why Sensei was interested in him. He extended his hand in greeting, but Izuku instinctively backed away, sensing danger. Just then, a voice shouted for the young man to stop, causing Izuku to jump and look around for the source. The monitor in the corner flickered to life, revealing the unfolding scene. He could barely discern the shoulders of a man in a suit, the rest of him shrouded in shadows. The man asserted that young Izuku was not to be harmed. Before anyone else could speak, Izuku asked how the man knew him, why he was there, and what was wanted from him. The figure on the monitor cleared his throat before introducing himself as 𝐼𝐴, the leader of the League of Villains. He had Kurojiiri bring Izuku there for a conversation. Izuku questioned what a group of villains could possibly want with him. The man expressed his satisfaction at Izuku's calm demeanor. Izuku shook his head, admitting that he was not truly calm. Normally, he would be terrified, but if the man intended to harm him, he wouldn't bother with a civil conversation or have stopped the other man. He looked up at the ceiling, expressing his exhaustion with life and his longing to end his suffering. The man acknowledged the pain but suggested that things could improve. Izuku returned his gaze to the monitor, skeptical about the offer of death and questioning the logic of bringing him there if that was the case. Tamura, clearly annoyed, warned Izuku to watch his tone. However, 𝐼𝐴 reassured Tamura, stating that he had yet to explain why Izuku was there. He revealed that he might consider having Izuku killed, but first, he had a proposition. Curious, Izuku asked what the proposition was. 𝐼𝐴 held up a burnt notebook that Izuku recognized as his own, which he had discarded from the roof earlier that day. He inquired why the man had it and what it had to do with anything. 𝐼𝐴 explained that Kurojiiri had found the notebook, and upon examining its contents, he was impressed by the quality of Izuku's work, even better than some professionals. This praise surprised Izuku, as no one had ever acknowledged his talent before. 𝐼𝐴 continued, stating that he wanted to employ Izuku's talents for the League, as they could prove to be a valuable asset. Izuku raised his hand, questioning whether the man truly believed what he was saying. Tamura stepped forward, clearly irritated, but 𝐼𝐴 addressed Izuku's concerns. He acknowledged the societal treatment of those without quirks, emphasizing that he regarded quirks as mere tools. He wanted Izuku because a skilled individual could achieve more with modest tools than an unskilled person with the best equipment. He asked Izuku to consider his offer without sharing his past. Izuku was taken aback. People usually treated him as worthless for lacking a quirk, but this man seemed to value him. For the first time in a long while, Izuku felt a glimmer of hope. Just as he was about to agree, he paused to set some conditions. 𝐼𝐴 seemed pleased, acknowledging that only a fool would rush into such a situation without thought. Izuku stated that he would not kill, especially not innocents, as he was not a monster. He wanted some control over his actions and a place to live. He expressed that he no longer wished to die and feared that refusal would lead to his demise, but he did not want to drag his mother down with him. He requested not to be called Izuku or Midoriya, as that person was no longer alive. 𝐼𝐴 chuckled, agreeing that they would have eliminated him, but promised that if he joined, all his conditions would be met. He offered to help Izuku disappear to protect those he cared about. With the old identity gone, he asked what name Izuku would prefer. Izuku grinned at the monitor, feeling a sense of resolve. He hoped his friend would understand that he had become something different, no longer the person he once was. Deku woke up and glanced at the clock on the nightstand, noting that it was 10 a.m. It had been several days since he decided to join the League. He knew his mother would be worried by now, but he felt he had little choice in the matter and believed it was best for her not to get involved. He was confident that he wouldn't be found. After getting out of bed and dressing, he headed to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. As he sat down to eat, he took in his new surroundings. The League had provided him with a spacious apartment that included a 𝐼𝐴 bedroom, 2 additional rooms, 2 bathrooms, a living room, and a combined dining area and kitchen, along with a veranda. The dining area was simply furnished with a table and 2 chairs, while the kitchen contained only basic appliances. The living room featured a sofa, a coffee table, and a TV mounted on the wall. His bedroom was minimalistic, containing just his bed, a closet filled with new clothes, and an end table with a lamp and alarm clock. One of the other rooms was empty, while the other held a couple of empty bookshelves, 2 computers, and a chair. This room was designated for his analysis work. After finishing breakfast, Deku entered the analysis room, took a seat, and powered on both computers. Before he could begin his tasks, the face of 𝐿_1 appeared on one of the screens. 𝐿_1 greeted him, stating that since Deku had been with the League for a few days, it was time to discuss his upcoming responsibilities. Deku realized this meant he wouldn't be limited to just analyzing quirks. 𝐿_1 explained that while his analytical skills were valuable, he would also be assigned high-priority projects and would need to venture into the field for various assignments. He emphasized the importance of Deku learning to take care of himself and instructed him to be ready in an hour for his first lesson, with 𝐼𝐻𝐬 set to pick him up. Once 𝐿_1 concluded the call, Deku was left alone with his thoughts. He understood that his situation was evolving, and while he wasn't entirely pleased, he recognized he had no choice but to prepare for what lay ahead. He was aware that things could become dangerous if he wasn't cautious, but he had already committed to joining the League, and there was no turning back. An hour later, a portal appeared, ready to transport him for training. Without hesitation, he stepped through, fully prepared to embrace his new life. 10 months later at UA, All Might observed the applicants as they navigated the exam. Although he wasn't an official judge, he was present to assess potential successors for his quirk, One for All. He had someone in mind but was keen to see if any of the incoming first-year students might prove to be more worthy. He recalled a moment from months ago when a boy had questioned whether someone could become a hero without a quirk. All Might found himself reflecting on that encounter, feeling a mix of regret and concern for the boy's dreams. He had discouraged the boy for his own safety, knowing the risks faced by those without quirks. However, he realized that he could have offered the boy a chance to become his successor. Despite their brief meeting, he sensed the boy had the potential to be a great hero. Shaking his head, All Might dismissed the thought, recognizing the challenges a quirkless individual would face in controlling such power. Even if he had bestowed his quirk upon the boy, it was unlikely he would have been able to manage it effectively. Turning his attention back to the exam, All Might couldn't shake the curiosity about what had become of the boy. Meanwhile, Deku was in the League's training room, a simple space equipped with a few punching bags, a boxing ring, a training mat, weights, and a closet filled with extra supplies. Following 𝐿_1's orders, he had dedicated the past 10 months to rigorous training, reserving his analysis work for his free time. Lacking a quirk, he had also begun developing various tools and items with assistance from the League for use in the field. Over the past 10 months, Deku had undergone significant changes, both mentally and physically. He had grown his hair out slightly and dyed it from its natural dark green to black. Although it wasn't immediately apparent when he wore his typical attire, the extensive training and workouts had transformed him into a muscular figure, leaving behind the traces of the scrawny boy he once was. After his time with the League, Deku's personality had transformed significantly. He was no longer the timid individual who feared everyone. He had become tougher, standing his ground against anyone except for 𝐿_1. His mind and senses had sharpened, enabling him to perform better than ever before. Following 10 months of training, Deku no longer had a mentor guiding him. Instead, he worked independently to enhance his physical abilities and refine the skills he had acquired. He was currently practicing martial arts in just a pair of training shorts, utilizing one of the sandbags when a portal opened, revealing 𝐼𝐻𝐬. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 greeted Deku, acknowledging the evening. Deku glanced at a nearby window, realizing 𝐼𝐻𝐬 was correct. He shook his head, surprised at how absorbed he had been in his training. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 noted that Deku's dedication would make their sensei proud and mentioned that he had been asked to bring Deku for a meeting. Deku quickly gathered his belongings, putting on his shirt and shoes before stowing away his gloves in the closet. Stepping through the portal, Deku found himself in a bar, alone with 𝐼𝐻𝐬 and Shigaraki. He greeted Shigaraki with a teasing remark, which irritated him. However, before Shigaraki could react, 𝐿_1 appeared on his usual screen. Despite Shigaraki's disdain for Deku, He understood the importance of maintaining composure in 𝐒𝐻𝐻's presence. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 addressed the three of them, indicating he assumed they knew the purpose of the meeting. Deku, having been focused on his training, admitted he was unaware. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 sighed before revealing that All Might had taken a teaching position at UA. Deku shifted slightly at the mention of his former idol, feeling a twinge of resentment. He realized that 𝐾𝐿 would likely be taught by All Might, and despite his complicated feelings towards 𝐾𝐿, he acknowledged his former bully's intelligence and skills. Curious about the significance of this information, Deku inquired further. 𝐒𝐮𝐲 urged him to wait for 𝐒𝐻𝐻 to explain. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 elaborated that All Might posed a significant threat to their organization and needed to be eliminated to prevent him from undermining their goals. He mentioned that 𝗟𝗏 had been sent to UA to create a distraction and gather intelligence. Shigaraki boasted about his findings, but Deku chose to ignore him and turned his attention back to 𝐒𝐻𝐻, asking what they had discovered. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 informed them that Class 1A, along with 3 instructors, including All Might, would be visiting the USJ for rescue training. Deku guessed they planned to attack during this trip and sought clarification on how they would execute their plan. Shigaraki taunted him, questioning if he feared for his idol's safety. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 silenced Shigaraki, explaining that while All Might was powerful, he was not invincible. 𝗟𝗏 and 𝐒𝐮𝐲 would lead a group to confront All Might and eliminate the symbol of peace. Deku acknowledged that the task was not impossible but was curious about his role in the plan. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 revealed that he had a unique opportunity for Deku, suggesting that the young man who had tormented him throughout his life would be present, providing Deku a chance for confrontation. After a moment of contemplation, Deku resolved to participate. The following morning, Deku awoke, checking his alarm clock and realizing he had time before needing to prepare. Feeling restless, he got up and made a light breakfast. He was uncertain about the source of his anxiety. It could be nerves about the upcoming mission or excitement, perhaps a mix of both. He was justified in feeling this way, as he was about to attack the school he had once dreamed of attending, aiding the League in their attempt to confront All Might. This was also his opportunity for revenge against 𝐾𝐿, who had caused him so much suffering. After calming himself, Deku entered the third room of his apartment, which had undergone significant changes during his 10 months there. Against the far wall stood a mannequin wearing his outfit. It consisted of a white button-up shirt, a black vest, a tie, and dress breathes, all layered over a lightweight armored vest that allowed for mobility while providing protection. He had metallic gauntlets, leg guards, and black combat boots. Above the mannequin rested a black mask covering the lower half of his face and a pair of red-lensed goggles. Though it appeared simple, each piece was equipped with various functions. One wall displayed most of his gear and tools, including throwing knives, pistols, and explosives, while the opposite wall contained drawers filled with additional tools, ammunition, and assorted items. Deku donned his outfit, leaving the headgear for last, and began to assess what he might need for the mission. He had discussed the plan with 𝐒𝐮𝐲 and Shigaraki, deciding that the students would be sent to different locations within the USJ to facilitate their capture. Deku would accompany a group to one of these locations, with 𝐒𝐮𝐲 ensuring 𝗶𝐿 would be part of that group. After considering various possibilities and strategies, Deku began to gather his gear. He secured a utility belt to carry additional equipment, loading it with tranquilizer pistols and extra clips, as well as 10 throwing knives, 2 of which he concealed in a hidden compartment in his sleeve. Afterward, he took 2 smoke bombs, 2 special bombs containing a freezing substance, and a flashbang. He also grabbed a pair of small cases before leaving the room. Satisfied with his preparations, he made his way to the living room, determined to head straight to his location in the USJ. He arrived just in time to see a portal opening. With a quiet resolve, he walked through the portal, adjusting his mask and placing his goggles on his forehead. On the other side, he found himself in an area filled with ruined buildings. As he surveyed the surroundings, he noticed other portals opening, releasing a few thugs. One of the newcomers stepped forward, towering over him with a muscular build. He scrutinized Deku, questioning his status. The thug's arrogance was clear as he remarked on Deku's appearance, implying that his quirk must be something special. Deku calmly stated that he was quirkless and expressed indifference to the thug's opinion. He warned the thug not to harm the blonde boy who would be arriving soon. The thug, filled with bravado, dismissed Deku, asserting that he wouldn't take orders from someone without a quirk and suggested that Deku would only be a burden. As the thug reached for Deku, he swiftly grabbed the thug's arm and flipped him onto his back. The thug, enraged, attempted to rise, only to feel something cold and sharp at his neck. Looking down, he saw Deku holding one of his throwing knives. The fear in the thug's eyes was evident as he met Deku's gaze, which revealed no mercy or kindness. Deku then stood up and sheathed his knife, expressing his indifference to the thug's fate and how he anticipated the arrival of his friends would change the tide of the encounter. Deku recognized that these thugs were mere amateurs who would stand no chance against Bakugo and whoever accompanied him. Before the thugs could react, Deku departed, seeking a vantage point to observe the unfolding situation. Reaching the top of a building, he looked down and saw the thugs gathered inside a structure where a portal was opening. Suddenly, two figures flew through, landing on the ground. Deku's heart raced with a mix of fear and anger upon seeing Bakugo. He adjusted his goggles, activating a zoom function that allowed him to see clearly. Alongside Bakugo was a student with spiky red hair, dressed only in breathes and adorned with hoop accessories on his shoulders. The two students quickly regained their footing, and as expected, Bakugo charged at the thugs without hesitation. Deku watched as they skillfully fended off the attackers. He deduced that the red-haired student possessed a hardening quirk that transformed his body into both weapon and armor. He also noted Bakugo's evident improvement in combat skills. As Deku had anticipated, the thugs were swiftly overwhelmed by the students. Recognizing that the fight was nearing its conclusion, Deku rolled up his sleeve and pointed his arm toward the building where the students were engaged. He pressed a button on his gauntlet, and a wire shot out, securing itself to the structure. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes, feeling a surge of determination. This was his moment to seek revenge for the years of mistreatment he had endured. With renewed resolve, he opened his eyes and sprinted toward the edge of the roof, leaping and using the wire to swing toward a window, aiming to kick Bakugo. However, the red-haired student noticed and quickly intervened, using his quirk for protection, resulting in both of them being knocked down. The three quickly regained their footing, and Bakugo demanded to know who Deku was. Under his mask, Deku smirked, recognizing that 𝐾𝐿 hadn't changed at all. At that moment, a thug resembling a chameleon charged at them, brandishing a knife. Bakugo reacted swiftly, grabbing the thug's head and slamming it into the ground before unleashing an explosion, demanding to know if Deku was allied with the thugs. In response, Deku calmly lowered his sleeve and retrieved one of his smoke grenades. He recognized that the red-haired student posed a significant threat and needed to be dealt with to prevent him from shielding Bakugo. Just as Bakugo lunged at Deku, the bomb detonated, creating a cloud of smoke. Deku swiftly dodged and moved toward where the red-haired student had been standing. Bakugo fired an explosion, which only added to the smoke. The red-haired student activated his quirk and threw a punch at Deku, but Deku skillfully slid between his legs. Before the student could react, Deku seized him by the waist and executed a German suplex. Deku quickly released him and rolled away, narrowly avoiding Bakugo's explosive punch. While still on the ground, Deku attempted to sweep Bakugo's legs, but Bakugo used his explosions to propel himself over Deku, firing more shots in his direction. Deku shielded his face with his arms and leaped away to create distance. Deku drew two knives and threw them at Bakugo, but the red-haired student intervened, shielding Bakugo once more. The pair of students then charged at Deku from opposite sides. In response, Deku activated a flashbang, tossing it into the air before looking away and covering his ears. Unaware of its effects, the students looked up just as it detonated, leaving them momentarily blinded. Seizing the opportunity, Deku threw an ice bomb at the red-haired student, freezing him up to his neck, before launching himself at Bakugo with a flying kick. Not giving Bakugo an opening, Deku leaped at him, delivering a series of rapid punches to his face. After a few moments, Bakugo raised his hands, using his quirk to blast Deku away. Quickly recovering, Bakugo stood up, but before he could react, Deku threw another pair of knives. 𝗏𝐿𝐲 deflected them, but the smoke from his quirk obscured his vision, allowing Deku to close the distance. He landed a few punches before grabbing 𝗏𝐿𝐲 by the shoulders, pulling him closer, and driving his knee into 𝗏𝐿𝐲's gut. As 𝗏𝐿𝐲 recoiled, clutching his stomach, Deku spun around and delivered a swift kick to 𝗏𝐿𝐲's face, sending him crashing to the ground. Deku thought to himself that he couldn't believe 𝗏𝐿𝐲 was weaker than he remembered. He reflected on how he used to be a coward. Just as he began to turn away, 𝗏𝐿𝐲 broke free from the ice and landed a punch that knocked Deku back. 𝗏𝐿𝐲 then got up and unleashed a barrage of blasts, pushing Deku further back. Together with another student, 𝗏𝐿𝐲 charged at Deku, both of them throwing punches that sent him crashing through a doorway and down a flight of stairs. Deku looked up to see 𝗏𝐿𝐲 standing at the top of the stairs. Before he could react, 𝗏𝐿𝐲 reached for his gauntlet, and every instinct told Deku to run. He jumped into another room just as a massive explosion erupted down the stairway, debris flying into the room and propelling him forward. Landing on his stomach, Deku rolled over to catch his breath, realizing how close he had come to disaster. He glanced back at the spot where he had been standing, now just a gaping hole, and thought it might be too soon to assume he was safe. As he stood up, contemplating his next move, he heard the sound of students rushing down the steps. He grabbed his guns and emptied one of them, quickly reaching into his belt for a container. Opening it revealed another magazine, which he loaded into his gun just as his opponents entered. He fired the gun with the new ammo, and as expected, the red-haired student stepped in as a shield. Instead of being deflected, the shot erupted, splattering the liquid on his chest. The red-haired student fell to one knee, grimacing as he clutched the area where the liquid had landed. Deku took the opportunity to shoot him twice in the same spot, causing the student to gasp. 𝗏𝐿𝐲 yelled out the name of his friend, glaring at Deku and demanding to know what the substance was. Deku, his voice distorted by his mask, explained that it was a special substance he had concocted with some assistance. He described how it initially caused a burning sensation but would soon numb the area. As he spoke, he waved the gun around to distract 𝗏𝐿𝐲 while quietly aiming a tranquilizer gun at the red-haired student. Taking advantage of 𝗏𝐿𝐲's distraction, Deku shot the tranquilizer into the student's unprotected chest, knocking him out. 𝗏𝐿𝐲's anger intensified. He charged forward, pulling his arm back to throw a punch. Deku anticipated this move, thinking to himself that 𝗏𝐿𝐲 always started with a right hook. He grabbed 𝗏𝐿𝐲's arm and flipped him onto his back, attempting to stomp down on his head. 𝗏𝐿𝐲 reacted quickly, blasting Deku and knocking him off balance before getting back on his feet to attack again. Deku performed a series of backflips, dodging 𝗏𝐿𝐲's blasts and creating distance. Not wanting to give 𝗏𝐿𝐲 a chance, Deku tackled him, catching him off guard. As he jumped up, he activated a smoke bomb and switched on the infrared function of his goggles to see through the smoke. 𝗏𝐿𝐲 blasted around himself, unsure of where Deku would appear from, when suddenly Deku swept his legs out from under him, knocking him onto his back. Deku then landed on 𝗏𝐿𝐲's stomach, causing him to cough. As the smoke began to clear, Deku bent down beside 𝗏𝐿𝐲, placing his last ice bomb on his chest and activating it, effectively trapping him. Deku leaned in close, whispering that 𝗏𝐿𝐲 wasn't as tough as he pretended to be. 𝗏𝐿𝐲 growled in response, demanding to know who Deku was so he could plan his revenge. Deku revealed that he was merely a ghost of someone discarded by society, returning for vengeance. He meant every word, as in the eyes of many he had perished 10 months ago. Lifting his goggles, he locked eyes with 𝗏𝐿𝐲 and declared it was time for him to leave. With that, he raised his fist and delivered a final punch to 𝗏𝐿𝐲's face, knocking him out. Deku stood and walked toward the stairway, pausing to assess the situation through the hole. Using his goggles, he spotted All Might engaged in battle with a giant bird-like villain. To his surprise, the mysterious figure was holding his own against the symbol of peace. Determined to join the fight, Deku activated the grappling hooks on his gauntlets and swiftly maneuvered between the buildings. After exiting the area, he sprinted toward the scene of the battle, arriving just in time to witness the Birdman being launched through the air as All Might faced off against Shigaraki and Kurohige. Deku called out to the two members of the League of Villains, noting that their confidence had been misplaced. 𝗂𝐮𝐲𝐿 acknowledged him as he approached, while Shigaraki growled in disbelief, unable to comprehend how All Might had been bested. Deku thought to himself that Shigaraki truly acted like a child, and as he watched the hero before him, he felt a surge of anger rising within him. It was time for a strategic retreat, and Deku suggested it to his team. Shigaraki, however, was not pleased and confronted Deku, questioning his willingness to give up. Deku pointed out that their strongest ally had just been incapacitated and that reinforcements were likely on the way. He glanced at All Might, noticing the steam rising from him, indicating his time was running out. Suddenly, he spotted 𝗂𝐮𝐲𝐿 and urgently instructed him to open a portal. 𝗂𝐮𝐲𝐿, sensing the urgency, quickly created a portal at the designated location and another behind them. Just as they prepared to escape, a bullet struck the ground nearby, emphasizing the danger they were in. Deku looked toward the entrance, where a group of pro-heroes had arrived as backup. He urged Shigaraki to retreat, emphasizing that they had no other option. 𝗂𝐮𝐲𝐿 supported Deku's suggestion, and after a moment of frustration, Shigaraki reluctantly agreed, casting a fierce glare at All Might and warning him that his days as the symbol of peace were numbered. All Might responded with a determined grunt, indicating he would not back down. 𝗂𝐮𝐲𝐿 enveloped them in mist, transporting them away. When Deku regained consciousness, he found himself on a couch in the league's bar. 𝗂𝐮𝐲𝐿 and Shigaraki were nearby, and Deku inquired about what had happened and how long he had been out. 𝗂𝐮𝐲𝐿 informed him that they had taken care of his injuries while he was unconscious. As Deku attempted to move, he felt a sharp pain throughout his body and realized he was only wearing breaths, with bandages covering much of him. He noted that he needed to improve the coverage of his armor, struggling to sit up. Shigaraki commented on the situation, pointing out that Deku had nearly suffered a concussion. Deku touched his head, feeling more bandages and reflecting on how adrenaline had masked his injuries. A voice interrupted their conversation. It was 𝗂𝐿, who had appeared unexpectedly. The trio was surprised to see him in person rather than on the monitor. 𝗂𝐿 approached Deku and placed a hand on his shoulder, causing a tingling sensation that gradually eased his pain. Deku expressed gratitude but questioned 𝗂𝐿's presence, suspecting it wasn't solely for healing. 𝗂𝐿 confirmed Deku's suspicion and shifted the conversation to their recent mission, acknowledging that while it had not gone as planned, they had still managed to demonstrate that heroes were not invincible. He suggested they take their time for future operations and praised Deku for his performance, noting that he had handled the situation with impressive skill despite the challenges he faced. 𝗂𝐿 explained that Shigaraki had intentionally chosen a group that would not accept Deku as a leader, but Deku had managed to turn that around by studying their opponents and making a tactical retreat. Deku felt a mix of confusion and pride at 𝗂𝐿's words, realizing the growth he had achieved in a short time. 𝗂𝐿 then requested to speak with Shigaraki and 𝗂𝐮𝐲𝐿 privately, advising Deku to go home and rest. Days passed since the attack on UA, and while some students were still recovering, excitement built for the upcoming sports festival, where they would showcase their quirks to pro heroes for potential scouting. However, not everyone felt at ease, particularly 𝗂𝐻𝐻, who was still grappling with the aftermath of the encounter. After waking up in the hospital, he learned about his injuries, which included broken ribs and a fractured wrist. Recovery Girl treated him, but the wounds to his pride lingered, fueling his longing for revenge. During his hospital stay, 𝗂𝐻𝐻 spoke with the police about the villain, describing him as a ghost-like figure with a physical enhancement quirk. Kirishima, on the other hand, had only sustained minor injuries, attributing his luck to his quirk. He believed the villain had targeted 𝗂𝐻𝐻 specifically, as he had only tried to incapacitate Kirishima to eliminate him from the fight. Kirishima shared his thoughts with the police, agreeing with 𝗂𝐻𝐻's assessment of the villain's quirk. At UA, Nizu convened a meeting with several teachers, including All Might, Midnight, BLD King, and Snipe, along with Detective Naomasa Tsukachi, who provided an update on the League of Villains. Tsukachi reported that there was no new information on the escaped villains. The discussion then shifted to Shigaraki Tamura's character and the Nomu creature, eventually leading to the mention of the villain who had appeared at the end of the confrontation. Tsukachi noted that Shigaraki had referred to Deku as Deku, highlighting the significance of the name in their ongoing conflict. They lacked any prior information about crimes or appearances, leading them to believe this was the villain's first act. Snipe inquired whether this was the same villain who had fought 𝐒𝐿 and Kirishima alone and emerged victorious. He noted that even though those two were relatively new, they could hold their own, indicating the villain was indeed dangerous. They were fortunate he had chosen to spare their lives. Tsukachi interjected, mentioning that according to Kirishima, the villain seemed to think Deku held some sort of grudge against 𝐒𝐿 and showed no interest in him. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 speculated that this could explain why the villain had not harmed Deku. However, he questioned why 𝐒𝐿 had not been targeted if the villain had a grudge against him. Vlad King asked if 𝐒𝐿 had any insight into why the villain was after him. Tsukachi replied that 𝐒𝐿 had asked the villain's identity, but the response was cryptic, describing himself as a ghost of someone discarded by society, returning for revenge. The villain's mask had distorted his voice, making it impossible for 𝐒𝐿 to recognize him, even if he knew who it was. 𝐼𝐻 frowned at this revelation. He recalled that the villain's voice had not sounded distorted and shared his thoughts with Tsukachi, noting that the villain's voice and build suggested he was around the same age as their students. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 expressed sadness that someone so young could turn to villainy, while Snipe reminded them that age did not excuse the attack on their students, marking the villain as an enemy. Tsukachi suggested narrowing down their list of suspects based on the criteria they had discussed. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 added that they should consider the possibility that Deku might be quirkless. He pointed out that Deku had used weapons, gadgets, and hand-to-hand combat to defeat the students, with no clear signs of a quirk being employed. With enough training and the right tools, a quirkless individual could indeed become a formidable opponent. 𝐼𝐻 nodded, recognizing 𝐒𝐮𝐬's valid point and trusting his judgment. Suddenly, a memory surfaced in his mind, a young man's voice asking if someone could become a hero without a quirk. 𝐼𝐻 gasped, realizing the striking similarities between Deku and the young man, from their voices to their hair, with the only notable differences being hair color and Deku's more toned physique. Midnight noticed 𝐼𝐻's distress and asked what was wrong. He locked eyes with Tsukachi and instructed him to search for a quirkless boy around the same age as their students. Without waiting for a response, 𝐼𝐻 stood up and left the room, hoping he was mistaken about the situation. Meanwhile, Deku made his way toward the UA Sports Festival, dressed in a black hoodie, black jeans, and red sneakers. He had received a mission from the League to observe the festival and analyze the quirks of the participants, as they could potentially become adversaries. 𝗟𝗡 had emphasized the importance of being prepared. Arriving early, Deku decided to wait outside the stadium. He sat on a nearby railing, watching the crowd when he spotted two familiar faces. He waved at them, recognizing they were from UA, the school for aspiring heroes. The two students paused and turned to him. One was a short girl with a slender build, large brown eyes, and shoulder-length hair that matched her eye color. The other was a tall, muscular young man with dark blue hair, neatly styled, and a serious expression. The girl responded, surprised by his recognition, while Deku introduced himself as 𝐒𝐮𝐬, a name he had created for himself after joining the League. He explained that he had a hunch they were from UA. The girl introduced herself as 𝐿𝐼𝐻 and the boy as 𝐒𝐮𝐬. Deku expressed his surprise that they were in Class 1A, the class that had faced an attack, and noted how terrifying that must have been. He noticed their nervousness at the mention of the incident and quickly apologized, realizing they might not want to discuss it. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 suggested they leave to avoid being late, reminding 𝐿𝐼𝐻 of Aizawa's strictness. Deku raised his hands in apology, wishing them luck and encouraging them to give it their all. As they walked away, 𝐿𝐼𝐻 turned back to say goodbye, but Deku had already vanished without a trace. As Deku navigated the crowd toward the entrance, he thought about the upcoming competition, eager to see what the students were capable of. 𝐼𝐻, meanwhile, sat alone, preparing for the festival. He was expected to present medals to the victors but found his mind preoccupied with recent events. A few days after the staff meeting, he had visited Tsukachi to check on the search for Deku. While reviewing files of potential suspects, he stumbled upon the file of Izuku Midoriya, who was indeed quirkless, just as he had claimed. The connection to 𝐒𝐿 having attended the same middle school, added to the mystery surrounding Deku. He was reported as deceased, having lost his life the day after meeting 𝐼𝐻𝐬. Upon learning this, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 sought details from Tsukachi about the incident. It seemed that on that fateful day, the boy had been caught in the crossfire between two small-time gangs. A fire broke out in the building where he was located, and by the time authorities discovered his body, it was beyond recognition. Although the DNA test was inconclusive, it was deemed a match. The police speculated that he had either been in the wrong place at the wrong time or had witnessed something suspicious and gotten too close. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 reflected on the boy's character, believing he had been trying to be a hero and had gotten caught up in a desperate attempt to prove others wrong. After their conversation, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 departed, but the thoughts lingered in his mind. He stood by the window and, for a brief moment, thought he saw Izuku conversing with Iida and Uraraka. He rubbed his eyes and looked again, but they were nowhere to be found. He chastised himself for losing focus. Later, during the first and second rounds of the competition, Deku observed each competitor using their quirks, analyzing their techniques with ease. He paid particular attention to the combat rounds, where the most skilled and dangerous competitors showcased their abilities. Most of the Class 1A students had advanced to this stage, but some stood out more than others, especially Shoto Todoroki, the son of the No.2 hero, 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐻𝐬. As the battles commenced, Izuku meticulously recorded everything he witnessed, noting how individuals utilized their quirks and their fighting styles. Once the event concluded and 𝐼𝐻𝐬 delivered his closing remarks, Deku left, uninterested in listening to the No.1 Hero. Hours later, Deku sat in his apartment office, working on his analysis of videos featuring second and third year students captured by various league members. After finishing, he turned on the TV while preparing a meal. Something caught his attention. The hero killer had struck again in Hosu City, injuring the turbo hero 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐬. He recalled that Iida was related to 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐬 and speculated that if the hero killer continued his pattern, another attack was imminent. With that thought, Deku turned off the TV, ate, and went to bed. A couple of days later, Deku made his way to a bar, summoned by Kurojirai for a meeting. Nothing could have prepared him for the scene that awaited him. Crouched over Shigaraki, who had a knife embedded in his shoulder, was the hero killer. Deku was taken aback, realizing it was 𝐼𝐻𝐬. He wondered why the hero killer was there and why he was attacking Shigaraki, but he was surprised that Shigaraki wasn't attempting to stop him. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 explained that he would intervene if he could, but his body wouldn't cooperate, likely due to Shigaraki's quirk. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 then addressed Deku, remarking on the lack of principles in Shigaraki's group, noting that they were opposites but shared a common goal of dismantling the current society. Shigaraki, frustrated, pulled the knife from his shoulder, using his quirk to destroy it, and reached for 𝐻𝐻𝐬, who nimbly evaded him. Deku chose to ignore their conflict, walking behind the bar to fetch some water before taking a seat, observing the unfolding drama. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 commented on the nature of their confrontation, suggesting that those facing death reveal their true selves. He acknowledged Deku as an unusual individual, sensing the beginnings of a personal creed forming within him, and contemplated delaying his decision on Deku until he could see what he would become. Deku expressed his disdain for having someone like 𝐻𝐻𝐬 in their ranks. Kurojirai finally took action, suggesting that adding 𝐻𝐻𝐬 to their group would enhance their combat capabilities and that negotiations were necessary. Deku interjected, pointing out that Shigaraki's communication skills were lacking. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 questioned Deku's identity, noting that he appeared to be just a kid but must possess more depth. Deku set his water down, stood up, and assessed 𝐻𝐻𝐬. After a moment, he released a hint of his own intimidating presence, a skill he had acquired during his time with the League. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 responded with an even greater intensity, sending chills down Deku's spine. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 dismissed Deku's attempt at intimidation, and Deku grinned, acknowledging that he hadn't expected to intimidate him. He extended his hand for a handshake, introducing himself as Deku and expressing a longing to converse. He mentioned his interest in changing society, inviting 𝐻𝐻𝐬 to elaborate on his views. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 declared that today's society was filled with false heroes seeking fame and glory, and he intended to eliminate them until only true heroes remained, those who sought justice and aimed to save others. Deku nodded in agreement, recognizing the validity of 𝐼𝐻𝐽's concerns about the current state of heroism. However, he realized that while this was a significant issue, it wasn't his primary focus. His main longing was for better treatment of quirkless individuals, so no one else would have to endure the suffering he experienced. An hour later, Deku watched as 𝐼𝐻𝐽 departed through a portal back to Hosu City, where Shigaraki and Kurogiri had found him. Deku remarked on his attempt to engage with 𝐼𝐻𝐽, while Shigaraki indicated that the situation was far from over. Deku felt uneasy about the direction things were heading, anticipating another one of Shigaraki's outbursts. Shigaraki expressed his dissatisfaction with being injured and urged action. An hour later, Deku stood atop a water tower in Hosu City alongside Kurogiri, Shigaraki, and 3 Nomu. Dressed in his villain outfit, he had made a small adjustment. His mask and goggles had been replaced with a full-face mask that concealed his entire head. Shigaraki growled about taking away his foolish pride and crushing his enemies. He snapped his fingers, and the Nomu moved in different directions, causing chaos in their wake. Deku shook his head and leaped down, determined to search for the hero killer. He thought to himself that the villain was acting like a child, throwing tantrums when things didn't go his way. It surprised him that Sensei had given him 3 Nomu for this task. Dressed in his villain outfit, he had been sent to locate the hero killer and relay his position so the Nomu and the others could find him and strike. Izuku wandered through various alleyways. Reports from different news stations indicated that 𝐻𝐽 had been in the same city, attacking heroes in dark corners before vanishing, so he knew the villain was still nearby. He ran, ignoring the destruction caused by the Nomu and the heroes battling them. Just as he was about to give up and report to Shigaraki that he couldn't find 𝐻𝐽, he heard shouting nearby. Deku rushed toward the sound and arrived in an alley where he saw 𝐻𝐽 looming over a young man around his age, dressed in an ingenium costume, with an injured hero nearby. He guessed both were under the influence of 𝐻𝐽's quirk. 𝐻𝐽 was speaking to the teen, but Deku was too far away to hear the words. He didn't have time to ponder for long as 𝐻𝐽 raised his sword, clearly preparing to deliver a fatal blow. Without a second thought, Deku shot a grappling hook at 𝐻𝐽's sword, yanking it from his grasp. 𝐻𝐽 turned to face him, confusion evident on his face. He demanded to know who Deku was. Deku, still holding the sword, explained that he was wearing a mask, but it was him, Deku. As he approached, he sensed 𝐻𝐽's frustration. 𝐻𝐽 questioned why Deku was stopping him, insisting that the League had no reason to prevent him from eliminating the hero wannabe. Deku paused, even he was uncertain about his actions. He admitted he didn't know why he intervened, stating that he personally didn't kill and was unsure of his motives. 𝐻𝐽 pressed him, asking why he was there, since he had already made it clear he wasn't interested in joining the League. Deku explained that Shigaraki, in his typical fashion, had stirred up trouble and sent him to find 𝐻𝐽. He mentioned that he didn't have anything against 𝐻𝐽 and even agreed with his goals, but had issues with his methods. He proposed that he would pretend he never saw 𝐻𝐽 if he would let the 2 captives go, as his conscience wouldn't allow him to leave them behind, and he preferred a good night's sleep. 𝐻𝐽 found Deku's reasoning confusing, pointing out that it was contradictory for him to join the League while being against killing. He then pulled out another sword, aiming it at Deku, who raised his hands defensively, stating he didn't want any trouble. 𝐻𝐽 declared that it was too late. Deku had made it clear he wouldn't let him act freely, so he had to be eliminated. 𝐻𝐽 charged at Deku, leaving no room for further discussion. Deku realized he had no choice but to defend himself. In a split-second decision, he tossed the sword behind him and rushed at 𝐻𝐽, hoping to close the distance and make it difficult for 𝐻𝐽 to use his weapon. 𝐻𝐽 reached for a knife at his side and slashed at Deku, who ducked and slid between 𝐻𝐽's legs. From that position, he swung his leg, attempting to knock 𝐻𝐽 off balance. Deku aimed to land some hits while 𝐻𝐽 was down, but 𝐻𝐽 quickly recovered and attacked again. Just as they were about to engage, a wave of ice surged forward, trapping them from the shoulders down. 𝐻𝐽 yelled in surprise, questioning what was happening. A voice from the end of the alley identified itself as the source of the ice. The newcomer explained that he had followed Deku, suspecting him, and was surprised to find 𝐻𝐽 there as well. Both Deku and 𝐻𝐽 turned to see Todoroki, whom Deku recognized from the UA Sports Festival. Deku asked what Todoroki was doing there and if he had been waiting for the right moment to confront them both. Todoroki acknowledged his identity and confirmed his intention to deal with both of them at once, knowing it would be difficult to fight while protecting the two captives. Deku suggested that they might need to pause their fight, as getting caught would be detrimental. Stain agreed, nodding his head. Todoroki expressed confusion, pointing out that they were already trapped in his ice. Deku explained that stealth was not Todoroki's strong suit, and he had trained well. He then revealed that he had planted a small timed explosive before being trapped, which would free them without causing harm. Todoroki inquired how the situation would unfold, noting the complexities of being a hero in training while facing villains who were not on good terms. Deku acknowledged the tension and was uncertain about how things would proceed, especially if Stain broke free, potentially leading to a chaotic three-way confrontation. Deku urged Stain and Todoroki to stand down for a moment. Stain growled, questioning why he should stop and demanding to be released from the ice, insisting that false heroes needed to be dealt with. Deku warned both of them to cease their hostilities or he would call the League, which would bring a swarm of trouble to their location. Stain retorted, asking what would prevent him from escaping before Deku could make that call. Before Deku could respond, Ida began to rise, expressing his intent to confront Stain. He declared that because of Stain, his brother would never walk again and that he intended to take revenge. Deku stepped forward, intervening before Ida could reach Stain. He urged Todoroki to lower his ice and chastised Ida for his reckless behavior, emphasizing that he was putting himself in danger. The two UA students were taken aback by his outburst, but Deku continued, urging Ida to consider his actions in light of his brother's situation. Stain had taken the lives of several heroes, prompting Ida to confront Deku with anger. He felt the weight of his brother's legacy and insisted that he was the one who needed to take action against Stain. Ida stepped forward, ready to strike, but Deku intercepted him, redirecting his momentum and sending him crashing against the wall. Todoroki moved to intervene, but Deku raised a hand to stop him. He assured Todoroki that he had no intention of killing anyone, just wanting to have a serious conversation with Ida. Despite Ida's villainous reputation, Deku's tone was earnest, causing Todoroki to hesitate. Deku continued, urging Ida to reconsider his longing for revenge. He reminded Ida of his brother, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, and how he would never want Ida to become a killer. Ida turned away, conflicted, and Deku pressed on, explaining that revenge was a path for villains, not heroes. He warned Ida that if he went through with his intentions, he would only end up imprisoned and labeled a villain himself. As emotions swirled within Ida, a winged Nomu suddenly swooped in and seized Deku, lifting him into the air. Ida shouted in disbelief, realizing they were supposed to be on the same side. Before the Nomu could escape, Todoroki unleashed a blast of ice, freezing one of its wings and forcing it down. Deku managed to break free, narrowly avoiding another ice attack. Deku playfully chided Todoroki for trying to catch him again, while Todoroki continued to fire ice blasts, reminding Deku that despite his help, he was still a villain and needed to be captured. Deku urged Todoroki to use his full power, but just then, 𝗟𝗏 arrived on the scene. Concerned about his impending capture, Deku activated a signal on his gauntlet, summoning 𝗟𝗏. A portal opened, and he leaped through just in time, the portal closing behind him. 𝗟𝗏 growled in frustration, recognizing Deku as one of the attackers from the USJ incident. Ida was shocked to learn that Deku had been involved in the attack, especially since he had protected him from Stain. Questions raced through Ida's mind about who Deku truly was. After the chaos in Hosu, Ida and Todoroki found themselves at the police station, waiting in a small room. Ida had just been released from the hospital the day before. He questioned Todoroki about the purpose of their visit, gesturing with his hands in confusion. They had already spoken with the police, hadn't they? Todoroki explained that their brief account of the events likely wasn't enough, especially regarding Deku. Just then, two heroes they had interned with, 𝗟𝗏 and Manuel, entered the room, accompanied by a dog-headed man and a figure in a tan overcoat and hat, who introduced himself as Tsukachi. Before discussing anything further, Tsukachi informed them that their actions, particularly Todoroki's capture of Stain, were technically illegal. However, their involvement would remain confidential, and they would be pardoned for doing the right thing. They would still face consequences from UA, which made the students uneasy as they thought of Aizawa. Once the heroes left, Tsukachi turned to the students, explaining that he wanted to ask them about Deku and the League of Villains. Ida admitted he didn't know much about Deku, finding him confusing. Todoroki agreed, prompting Tsukachi to ask for clarification. Ida hesitated, grateful for Deku's intervention during his encounter with Stain. He expressed that Deku didn't seem like a villain at all. In fact, he was the reason Ida was still alive. Deku had fought Stain and refused to let him go when they were captured, instead allowing Stain to be arrested. He had even helped Ida abandon his quest for revenge. Todoroki added that it was hard to reconcile Deku's actions with his past attacks on Bakugo and Kirishima. He shared that he had heard rumors about Deku possessing a physical boosting quirk, but he hadn't seen any evidence of it. Instead, it seemed like Deku had trained hard to achieve his strength and was holding back, as he hadn't used his quirk yet. Tsukachi nodded, acknowledging their insights. While they were slightly off the mark, their observations helped confirm some theories. However, he reiterated that Deku was still a member of the League and a villain. After an hour of questioning, the students were free to leave, still puzzled by the events of that night and Deku's unexpected actions. Meanwhile, Tsukachi remained intrigued by their accounts, particularly Todoroki's comments about Deku's quirk and the Nomu's attack, which supported the theory that Deku might be quirkless. Considering his unusual behavior, it began to seem that the incident at the USJ stemmed from a personal grudge against Bakugo. All Might appeared quite intrigued by the villain, prompting the decision to inform him. However, Tsukachi felt uneasy. If a Nomu had targeted Deku, it indicated that the League believed Deku was unworthy of their group and sought to eliminate him. This sentiment was shared by others, although Deku had a different perspective. He found himself in a bar, engaged in a heated discussion with Shigaraki. Deku confronted Shigaraki, questioning the motive behind the Nomu's attack. Shigaraki, perched on a bar stool, sipped his drink while casting a glare at Deku, feigning ignorance about the situation. Deku, standing firm, stepped closer, accusing Shigaraki of harboring animosity towards him since their first encounter, which had only intensified since the USJ incident. He believed Shigaraki's disdain was sufficient reason for an attack. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 observed the escalating confrontation from behind the bar, prepared to intervene if necessary. As the argument unfolded, he recalled events leading up to the incident in Hosu. Shigaraki had indeed intended for one of the Nomu to target Deku, prompting 𝐒𝐮𝐬 to contact AFO for intervention, knowing Shigaraki would likely disregard his warnings. Suddenly, Shigaraki's glass shattered as both he and Deku lunged at one another. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 swiftly created portals to separate them, sending Deku to his apartment to keep them apart. AFO's voice emanated from a monitor, admonishing Shigaraki for his persistent attempts to eliminate Deku. Shigaraki reluctantly acknowledged AFO's authority, agreeing to cease his actions against Deku. A week passed, during which Deku focused on avoiding Shigaraki while further honing his skills. AFO had informed him of an upcoming mission, prompting him to prepare. Despite becoming a skilled fighter, Deku recognized that he still had areas to improve. His combat techniques had developed since joining the League, but his missions primarily involved infiltration and information gathering, leading him to enhance his analytical skills through the study of psychology and body language. This training allowed him to better understand and read people. He also practiced stealth and sharpened his senses, which had previously alerted him to being followed by Todoroki in Hosu. Additionally, he explored fine arts and mechanics to help him blend in wherever he went. These skills, among others, were what he practiced in preparation for a mission that would require him to infiltrate one of the most heavily guarded locations in the world. Meanwhile, at UA, Tsukachi was briefing All Might on the Nomu situation. All Might, furious upon hearing the news, realized that AFO was not only alive but was orchestrating the League of Villains from the shadows. Tsukachi attempted to divert the conversation, bringing up the recent attack in Hosu and mentioning that Deku had been involved in the conflict against the hero killer before being attacked by a Nomu. The testimony suggested that the Nomu had aimed to eliminate Deku, though the reasons remained unclear. Tsukachi also presented a list of quirkless individuals he believed could be potential suspects, along with a file containing information about Izuku Midoriya, whom All Might had shown interest in. Surprised by the file's contents, All Might decided to share his insights. Elsewhere, Ida and Todoroki sought out Bakugo and Kirishima to discuss the villain. Kirishima inquired if they wanted to know more about the attacker. Bakugo, filled with anger, expressed his longing for revenge against the villain. Todoroki, curious, asked Kirishima for his thoughts on the matter. Kirishima acknowledged the villain's actions but noted that he had not killed them, which he appreciated, even if it did not change the fact that he was still a villain. Ida and Todoroki exchanged glances, aware they couldn't discuss their experiences in Hosu, as the official narrative was that they had merely been attacked by Stain and Deku. Ida mentioned that they had noticed something unusual about the attackers. Bakugo dismissed their concerns, insisting that the villain was simply a threat that needed to be eliminated. He believed he had lost previously due to surprise but was now prepared for any future encounters. Todoroki interjected, suggesting that the villain might not possess a quirk at all. Bakugo scoffed at the notion, insisting that a quirkless person could not have harmed him. He abruptly recalled Deku, the boy he had bullied for years, who had tragically passed away nearly a year ago. Frustrated with himself for the reminder, he began to walk away. Todoroki, confused, pointed out that Deku had been the one to attack Bakugo. Bakugo turned, glaring at him in disbelief, while Kirishima questioned what he meant. Deku was the name of the villain who had attacked them and was affiliated with the League. Bakugo stepped back, astonished by the revelation. It seemed impossible. Deku was someone he had known since childhood. Ida, observing the situation, noted that based on the villain's build and voice, he did appear to be around their age. This led him to a startling conclusion. All Might entered the hallway, having overheard their conversation. He expressed his relief at having caught the discussion and asked Bakugo to elaborate on who Deku was. Bakugo, taken aback, explained that it didn't matter because Deku was dead, having been killed before they finished middle school. He dismissed the idea that it could be him, recalling how Deku had always been timid and never stood up for himself. All Might frowned, recognizing that Bakugo was likely referring to Izuku Midoriya. Bakugo's words troubled him. He was aware of Bakugo's antagonistic nature, but the way he spoke about Deku hinted at deeper issues. It was rumored that Deku harbored a grudge against Bakugo, and if that were true, All Might have just uncovered his true identity and motive. He asked Bakugo to accompany him for a discussion. Bakugo hesitated, confused by All Might's demeanor, but ultimately followed him. The other students watched as the two walked away, puzzled by the unfolding events. Meanwhile, Deku was strolling down the street, taking a break to enjoy some fresh air. As he passed a small park, he spotted a group of high school girls he recognized from UA's Class 1A. He thought they must be hanging out, and tried to remain inconspicuous. However, 𝗟𝗏 spotted him and called out, prompting Deku to stop and lower his head slightly before approaching them with a smile. He reassured himself that they wouldn't suspect he was with the League, he was just an ordinary guy. He greeted the group, introducing himself as 𝐒𝐮𝐬 Midoku. They welcomed him warmly, and Mina playfully inquired if he was 𝗟𝗏's boyfriend. 𝗟𝗏 blushed and stammered, struggling to respond, so Deku quickly clarified that he had only met 𝗟𝗏 and Ida at the sports festival. Azui chimed in, reminding Mina that it was rude to pry, which made 𝗟𝗏 grateful. Deku then asked what they were doing, suggesting there were more exciting places to enjoy the night. Yaoyorozu explained that her family had tickets for the upcoming 𝐼 convention, but since they couldn't attend, they were deciding who would get the tickets through a competition. Hagakure suggested playing rock paper scissors. Deku raised an eyebrow, finding it a bit impractical unless she could turn off her quirk. Hagakure then showed him pictures with signs attached to sticks, and he understood. Jiraiya announced that they had won the competition, and the tickets would grant them early access to the convention and entrance to a party on the first night. Deku felt a twinge of confusion as he mentioned he would see them there, realizing he had let his guard down and inadvertently revealed part of his mission. 𝗟𝗏 was surprised to learn he was going too, and when she asked what he would be doing, he explained that he worked as an information broker, analyst, and freelance journalist, which was mostly true. 𝐒𝐮𝐲 remarked that he seemed young for such a role, implying he must have a remarkable quirk to have secured a job and an invitation to 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿and. Deku turned away, hiding his frustration. He revealed that he was quirkless and had achieved his position through skill alone, suggesting that their training as heroes was also commendable despite their age. 𝐒𝐮𝐲 acknowledged his point, expressing admiration for his accomplishments. The others joined in, praising his abilities and expressing a longing to be as skilled as he was. Deku was taken aback by their sincerity, realizing they were being genuine. 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐼𝐿 noticed something was off and asked if he was all right. Deku, confused by their concern and the strange looks he was receiving, suddenly became aware of a tear rolling down his cheek. He quickly turned away, insisting he had to leave, and dashed off before they could respond. As he ran, he wondered why their acceptance affected him so deeply. He was quirkless, yet they admired him. Why couldn't he express his gratitude? 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐼𝐿 watched him go, pondering what had just transpired. Days later, Deku found himself in his apartment, still reflecting on how accepting the girls had been. He decided to visit a bar to drop off some notes on heroes, hoping to clear his mind. However, he anticipated that he might end up frustrated again after dealing with Shigaraki. Upon arrival, he witnessed yet another altercation involving Shigaraki and some random individuals. The only difference from his previous encounter with Stain was that Kurohige was using portals to prevent anyone from getting hurt, and there was an unfamiliar bystander present. A middle-aged man dressed in dark purple breathes and a matching blazer, complete with plain black shoes and a partially unbuttoned shirt, stood nearby. He wore a thick, golden necklace made of multiple segments and a fluffy scarf that resembled intestines in both shape and color. Circular glasses perched on his nose as he puffed on a cigarette. He turned to Shigaraki and asked if starting a fight right before someone arrived was typical behavior or if he had just come at a bad time. He then noticed Deku and introduced himself as Jiren, curious if he was the Deku kid he had heard about. Before Deku could respond, Shigaraki shoved him aside, leaving in a huff. Deku, confused, asked what had just happened. Kurohige explained that Jiren had brought 2 potential recruits for the league, but Shigaraki had clashed with them. Deku scoffed, commenting on Shigaraki's poor communication skills, suggesting that even a pacifist might feel provoked by him. He glanced at the 2 newcomers. A young man around 20, dressed in a dark blue jacket with a high, ripped collar and matching breathes, and a small blonde girl about his age, wearing a school uniform beneath an oversized tan cardigan. The girl, with a wild look in her eyes, excitedly asked about her past encounters with Stain, inquiring about his BLD type and whether she could taste it while brandishing a knife. Deku quickly assessed that the girl was unhinged. Kurohige filled him in on the details. Jiren was a broker in the underworld associated with the League, while the young man was named 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸 and the girl was 𝐒𝐮𝐴 𝗏𝐼𝐼𝐿. They were inspired by Stain's ideology after watching a video about him. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸 looked down at Deku, remarking on the presence of children in the organization, implying desperation. Kurohige defended their decision, explaining that they had taken Deku in when he was on the brink of death, and he had since proven to be a valuable member of the League. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸 expressed his intent to carry out the hero killer's will but was reluctant to follow someone like Shigaraki. Deku agreed, acknowledging Shigaraki's troublesome nature, and decided to confront him to address the situation. Ignoring Kurohige's warnings, Deku set off to find Shigaraki, believing it was important for the new recruits to understand the kind of leader they would be following. He wandered through the Kiyoshi Ward shopping mall, weaving through the crowd until he spotted Shigaraki with his hood pulled up. As he approached, he accidentally bumped into 2 familiar figures, Jiren and Yaoyorozu. Jiren greeted him, recalling his name and asking how he was doing. Deku responded that he was fine and expressed surprise at running into them. Yaoyorozu explained that their entire class was there for a summer camp and they were gathering supplies. She then inquired about his earlier distress. Deku, feeling pressured, excused himself, claiming he was supposed to meet a friend. As he hurried past them, he collided with 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐼𝐿, who apologized for not seeing him. She wanted to ask about their last encounter, but Jiren interjected, noting that they had already asked him, which made Deku anxious. He tried to downplay the situation, explaining that as someone without a quirk, he wasn't accustomed to receiving compliments or admiration, which had caught him off guard. As he looked over their shoulders, he realized Shigaraki had vanished from sight and decided to wrap up the conversation. He complimented the girls, causing them to blush in surprise, and took the opportunity to slip away into the crowd. Just as he thought he had escaped, a voice called out from behind him, and he felt a hand grip the back of his neck. Shigaraki appeared, teasing him about being friendly with the girls. Deku groaned in frustration, insisting that he had merely run into them by chance. He then suggested that he could find a way to utilize their talents, urging Shigaraki to stop complaining. They needed to get moving. One of them had mentioned that their entire class was present, and while 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭 wasn't particularly sociable, he could still be there. If 𝐒𝐮𝐽 spotted him, his cover would be compromised. He had only said that to distract them and make his escape easier. Shigaraki, with a smirk, acknowledged the situation. He seemed surprisingly friendly, but his smile was unsettling. It was time to let go of the grip on his neck. After a moment of contemplation, Shigaraki finally released him and began walking away, expressing his annoyance. He remarked that the other was testing his patience and that he was fortunate their leader didn't want him dead. The other responded, pointing out that it hadn't stopped Shigaraki before. Ignoring the comment, Shigaraki continued, curious about why he had followed him. The other explained that he had noticed Shigaraki's anger earlier and thought he might need someone to talk to. Despite their differences, he acknowledged Shigaraki's leadership role in the league and emphasized the need to recruit more members. Shigaraki considered this before responding with a snarl, questioning the difference between him and 𝐼𝐮𝐲. The other fell silent, pondering the question. He was trying to understand Shigaraki's motivations. The difference between Shigaraki and 𝐼𝐮𝐲 was puzzling to him. Shigaraki's glare intensified as he expressed his disdain for 𝐼𝐮𝐲, feeling overshadowed by him. He was frustrated that 𝐼𝐮𝐲 had garnered support and admiration, despite his destructive tendencies, while he felt overlooked. As the conversation continued, the other began to see a different side of Shigaraki. He was evolving, seeking improvement, though still displaying a childish need for attention. Shigaraki pressed for the other's thoughts on their differences, prompting a careful response. The other explained that he couldn't grasp Shigaraki's goals and ideals, contrasting them with 𝐼𝐮𝐲's genuine motivations. 𝐼𝐮𝐲 had a clear purpose, influenced by all might, while Shigaraki seemed lost in his anger. Shigaraki's frustration was palpable as he reflected on the impact of all might, blaming him for the happiness of others. He walked away, muttering to himself, leaving the other to contemplate the situation. The other couldn't fully comprehend Shigaraki's perspective but recognized that trying to change society wasn't inherently wrong. As they traveled, the scene shifted to Deku, who was on a plane heading to 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿and, a hub for the world's leading scientists researching quirks. Sensei had informed him of a professor, an old friend of All Might, who intended to commit a crime. The professor planned to impersonate a hostage to recover stolen research but had inadvertently hired actual criminals instead of actors. When Sensei learned of this, he contacted Wolfram, the group's leader. Thanks to his negotiation skills, 𝐒𝐻𝐻 arranged for Deku to accompany them during the break-in. Deku's role was to gather information on various quirks and devices, but his true objective was to steal the professor's invention amidst the chaos. This device was rumored to amplify a user's quirk, far surpassing the quirk-enhancing drags circulating in the underground. Deku anticipated the freedom to explore, akin to being sent on vacation, albeit with the daunting task of stealing information from one of the most secure locations in the world. As he gazed out the window, he could see his destination approaching. He smiled, recalling how the old him would have been excited just to see it. As he disembarked from the plane, he slipped away from the crowd, making his way to the designated meeting spot for Wolfram. After waiting a few minutes, he suddenly heard the sound of a gun being readied behind him. Without turning around, Deku immediately recognized who it was. He warned Wolfram that if he didn't return alive, 𝐿 would come after him. Wolfram chuckled and holstered his weapon, acknowledging the seriousness of the situation with a casual remark about it being a test. Deku turned to face Wolfram, sizing him up. Wolfram was a large man with red hair and yellow eyes. Dark patches marred his skin around his mouth, nose and right eye, and a scar marked his left cheek. He wore a long white coat with gray cuffs and trimmings, along with combat gear that included boots, dark breathes, and a vest, complemented by brown gloves. Wolfram urged Deku to hurry, reminding him that they would be leaving soon. Deku frowned at Wolfram's commanding tone, which reminded him of 𝐾𝐿, who often treated him as if he were unworthy. Despite his reluctance, Deku followed, knowing he had no other option. Entering through the front gate would expose his identity. Upon arrival, Deku noticed a truck filled with operatives waiting to enter. Just then, Wolfram's phone rang. He answered with a growl, listening intently before going still at the news that All Might was present. After hanging up, he turned to Deku, who appeared troubled. Wolfram asked if Deku was afraid of All Might, but he quickly realized that Deku's expression revealed a deeper emotion, rage and disdain. Deku admitted he didn't fear All Might, he despised him. Before Wolfram could inquire further, a squad member approached, signaling it was time to leave. Wolfram gave Deku one last look before climbing into the truck, instructing him to enter through the gate and to remember that if he got caught, they had never met. As the massive gate opened and the driver moved forward, Deku hesitated for a moment, contemplating the challenge ahead. He was aware that if All Might recognized him, things could become complicated. He briefly considered having 𝐾𝐿 bring him back but dismissed the thought, reminding himself he had a job to do. When the gate began to close, Deku sprinted through. Once inside, he stopped, overwhelmed by the sights before him. Incredible inventions and attractions stretched as far as he could see. He mused that while this was a job, it felt more like a vacation. After dropping off his belongings at a hotel, he began to explore but soon realized he was lost. As he searched for a map, he accidentally bumped into a young man and woman around his age. He quickly apologized. The young woman reassured him, mentioning they had noticed he looked lost and offered assistance. She introduced herself as Melissa, while the young man introduced himself as 𝐒𝐿𝐬. Deku took a moment to observe Melissa. She was an attractive young woman with a round face, wavy blonde hair, and aqua blue eyes. Her outfit consisted of a white short-sleeved shirt with plaid cuffs, a dark raspberry pink waistcoat, and gray capri breathes paired with heeled brown boots. She also wore a wristwatch and pink oval-framed glasses. 𝐒𝐿𝐬 was tall and muscular, with noticeable scars on his arms. He had blue eyes and blonde hair styled in a cowlick. Melissa brought Deku back to the present, asking if he was looking for something specific. He explained that he was exploring and wanted to learn about the expo and its showcases. He introduced himself as 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐷, claiming to be a journalist. 𝐒𝐿𝐬 noted that it might be difficult to gather information since the expo wouldn't open to the public until the next day. Melissa thought for a moment before suggesting that since her father worked there, she could take him to an early showcase. Deku gratefully accepted her offer, expressing his appreciation. Melissa assured him that he didn't need to repay her, she was happy to help. Deku thought about how kind she was and felt a twinge of guilt for taking advantage of her offer. He marveled at the island's wonders, remarking on how incredible it was to be on a man-made island. Melissa explained that the island had all the facilities of a normal city, but travel was restricted to protect sensitive information. The security was tight, with the only place more secure than Island being 𝗟𝗏𝗧, the villain prison in Japan. Deku mentioned that he was from the same city as 𝗟𝗏𝗧, prompting 𝐒𝐿𝐬 to express surprise and share that he was also from there and a student at UA. 𝐒𝐿𝐬 decided to part ways, opting to try out the villain courses set up for the expo instead of exploring with them. As 𝐒𝐿𝐬 concluded his statement, he sprinted away, leaving Deku and Melissa behind. Deku found the situation rather unexpected. Melissa was about to respond when her attention shifted. She pointed toward a large blue multi-story building across the street and exclaimed that it was the monster hero, 𝐒𝐮𝐬, likely invited by his sponsors. She suggested they start their exploration there. Once inside, Melissa began to guide Deku around, highlighting various devices and their functions. Deku took diligent notes, absorbing all the information. During their tour, he discovered that Melissa was learning to create support gear like her father, David Shield, the inventor of the Quirk amplifier and the one who had orchestrated its theft. Deku felt a pang of sympathy, realizing how crushed she would be upon learning the truth. As Melissa showcased a massive tank-like vehicle, they were interrupted by a familiar voice. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 appeared, commenting on how it seemed like they were having fun. Deku greeted her, surprised to see her so soon. She reiterated her observation, prompting Deku to ask if she was alright. He then noticed 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 and 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 nearby and recalled their last encounter, greeting them as well. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 remarked on Deku's apparent enjoyment, while 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 teased him, her earphone jack swaying playfully. Deku felt a twinge of anxiety, wondering if they were accusing him of something. He quickly clarified that he had intended to meet a friend but had chosen to distract them instead. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 playfully jabbed one of her earphone jacks at him, sending a light vibration through his body, causing him to gasp slightly. Melissa inquired about his friends, and Deku introduced her, explaining that she was helping him with his work. Melissa suggested they all grab tea at a nearby cafe to continue their conversation. Moments later, at the cafe, the girls gathered around, with Melissa listening intently as they shared stories about their hero internships. Deku sat at a separate table, hoping to glean useful information, when two familiar faces delivered his drink. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 recognized Kaminari and Mineta, who explained they had signed up for extra work staff for a free trip to the island. Mineta, noticing Melissa, leaned toward Deku and asked for an introduction. Kaminari eagerly agreed, but Deku, sensing their intentions, declined, stating he could tell they were not genuine. Melissa watched the exchange, curious about their conversation, and asked if they were also from UA. The two boys, ignoring Deku, struck a pose in response. Before they could continue, Iida rushed over, reprimanding them for slacking off and reminding them of their responsibilities. Deku greeted Iida, surprised to see him there. Iida explained he came from a long line of heroes and had received an invitation to the expo, but was there alone due to family commitments. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 mentioned her invitation was due to her father's connections, and 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 added that she and the other girls had won their spots through a game of chance. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 confirmed that the other girls were present but couldn't visit the preview. They planned to explore the expo together the following day. Melissa offered to show them around, and the girls cheered in excitement. The boys, eager to join, were interrupted by a sudden explosion. Rushing toward the commotion, they arrived at a stadium featuring a giant rock in the center, where Kirishima was announced as the next challenger. Recognizing Bakugo among the competitors, Deku felt a wave of anxiety and quickly left the scene. Later, Melissa approached Deku at the cafe, concerned for his well-being. He assured her he was fine, but she could see through his facade. When she pressed him to share what was troubling him, Deku reluctantly revealed the complicated history he had with Bakugo, explaining that he wanted to keep their connection hidden from the others. Iida, who had overheard their conversation, interjected, prompting Deku to feel frustrated with himself for being overheard. He had failed to notice Iida, and now his identity might be at risk. Iida expressed concern, indicating that they would need to keep it a secret. He reassured that he would not tell anyone and hoped that one day, Deku would trust him enough to share the truth. Deku simply nodded, thinking that perhaps he would only share when one of them was in dire straits or when he faced consequences for his actions. Iida suggested they move on, and as Deku turned back, he noticed Melissa smiling at him. Her eyes held no judgment, which brought him a sense of calm. She assured him that she wouldn't inform the others, and they set off together. They searched for their group and soon found 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿, who, along with Iida, had also noticed their absence and had come looking for them. After exchanging a few fibs about their whereabouts, they explored the exhibits further, eventually reuniting with 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 and 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 before the preview was about to close. They made their way back to the cafe, where Kaminari and Mineta were just finishing their shift, sprawled on the ground and complaining. After greeting them, Iida handed out 2 tickets. Kaminari inquired about the tickets, and 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 explained that they were for the big expo reception that evening, a gesture of kindness from Melissa. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 added that Melissa thought they could use a break. Melissa clarified that she simply had a few extras and would be delighted if they accepted them. In response, the duo began to express their gratitude, showering her with praise. Iida then stepped forward, instructing everyone to don their formal attire and meet in the lobby at 6, emphasizing the importance of punctuality before hurrying off. Deku began to turn away, thinking it was time to say goodbye, but before he could leave, he felt a gentle tug on his sleeve. He turned to find Melissa holding onto it, expressing her longing to discuss something with him and inviting him to follow her. Melissa led him to her laboratory at the nearby academy. Deku marveled at the interesting surroundings and she acknowledged the resemblance to her father as she sifted through her belongings. Deku noted that most people aspired to be heroes these days, but he admitted he found her pursuits equally impressive. He observed the numerous trophies and complimented her talent, to which she humbly replied that she had struggled with her grades not long ago and had been working hard to improve. She revealed that she had given up on her own hero aspirations long ago. Deku was taken aback. After all, many people aim to be heroes. He asked her why she felt that way. She explained that being quirkless made her feel it would be foolish to pursue that path. After discovering her lack of a quirk at the age of 5, she had initially been in shock but had since found a new goal close to her heart, to follow in her father's footsteps. He had supported heroes through science rather than possessing a quirk himself, and he continued to protect peace in his own way. Deku realized that Melissa wanted to make a similar impact. She affirmed her longing to make a difference, hoping to do so through her scientific endeavors. She then offered him a ticket, noting that she thought it would be fun for him to attend the expo reception and that it might help him make valuable connections in his field. Deku hesitated, staring at the ground, feeling sympathy for her situation. He expressed his regret, acknowledging how difficult it must be to be told one lacks something that others possess naturally. Melissa appeared confused by his reaction, prompting him to clarify that it must be painful to learn about her quirklessness. She admitted it had been shocking at first, but she had a greater ambition that kept her motivated. After a moment of contemplation, Deku decided to accept the ticket, realizing it could be beneficial for him. He turned to leave, promising to think about attending. Once outside, he reconsidered and decided he would go, knowing he couldn't let Wolfram harm his sources and recognizing that Melissa would be there with the others. He also felt a sense of obligation to repay her kindness. 10 minutes later, he entered the lobby, dressed in a shirt, vest, and breathes from his villain outfit, hoping no one would recognize him. He spotted Iida and the other boys, including Todoroki, which surprised him, but 𝐒𝐿𝐬 was notably absent. He inquired about the girls' whereabouts, and Iida expressed his frustration about their tardiness. Just then, the door opened behind him, and he turned to see Uraraka and the other 2 UA girls arriving, all apologizing for their lateness while the boys resumed their praises. Uraraka expressed her surprise at Izuku's appearance, complimenting him on looking nice. He returned the sentiment, acknowledging her as well. 𝐿𝐬 remarked on the fancy attire she was wearing, feeling as if it were a costume. Kaminari chimed in, relieved that she wasn't in a t-shirt, and Mineta agreed, noting that even a jacket couldn't ruin her look. 𝐿𝐬, not one to let comments slide, retaliated by using her earphone jacks to send sound waves their way, telling them to be quiet. Iida attempted to restore order, urging everyone to contain themselves, but his words fell on deaf ears as they turned to the door to see Melissa entering. The boys were visibly taken with her, while the others simply stared in awe. Melissa greeted them, relieved that she hadn't missed them, and suggested they head downstairs to the party. Iida reassured Deku that he hadn't invited 𝐒𝐿𝐬, and even if he had, 𝐒𝐿𝐬 likely wouldn't show up. However, Kirishima had managed to convince 𝐒𝐿𝐬 to come, and they had gotten lost on their way. 𝐒𝐿𝐬 expressed his frustration, questioning Kirishima's sense of direction, while Kirishima insisted he had checked the map before they left. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted as an automated voice announced a bomb threat, sending everyone into a state of alarm. However, the real situation was far more dire. Wolfram and his group burst into the party room, revealing that they had taken control of the security system. He warned the gathered heroes that any attempt to resist would result in innocent people being targeted as threats. Following his command, orbs emerged from the ground, ensnaring the heroes in bindings. Meanwhile, the main group was trying to make sense of the chaos. Todoroki noted the lack of signal, while 𝐿𝐬 pointed out that the elevator was also out of service. Melissa expressed confusion, stating that the system shouldn't have gone into high alert for a bomb threat. Deku observed their attempts to understand the situation, realizing that Wolfram was making his move. He contemplated how to retrieve the device before Wolfram could, and then proposed they head to the party to gather information from workers or heroes. Melissa suggested using the emergency stairs to get closer. As they descended, everyone but Izuku was taken aback by the sight of the party being held hostage. Wolfram ordered his goons to take David and his assistant away, prompting Melissa to whisper in concern about her father. Izuku urged 𝐤𝐬 to use her quirk to listen in, and she complied, inserting her earphone jacks into the ground. Iida was about to investigate further when they were interrupted by Mirio, who had been hiding nearby. Mirio explained that he had escaped the party using his quirk when the thugs arrived and proceeded to inform them of Wolfram's takeover of the security system, which had turned the island into a hostage situation. After moving to a more secure area in the stairway, Deku addressed the group, acknowledging their longing to escape and informed the heroes outside but highlighting the challenges they faced. Melissa confirmed that the security was on par with that of Tartarus Prison, where the most dangerous villains were held. Kaminari sighed, suggesting they might have to wait it out. 𝐤𝐬, frustrated, questioned their acceptance of inaction. Todoroki reminded them that they were still students and not permitted to engage in actual hero work, while Yaoyorozu echoed the sentiment. Mirio, however, expressed his determination to help and save everyone, inspiring the group. Deku pointed out that they didn't necessarily have to fight. They just needed to regain control of the security system. Melissa revealed her knowledge of the security system's location, stating it was on the top floor and that the villains had disabled the identification and passwords. If they could reach it, they could restart the system and free everyone. 𝐤𝐬 raised concerns about remaining undetected, but Deku reassured them that they hadn't been found yet, indicating the villains were not adept with the system. As the group began to agree on a plan, Mirio interjected, stating he couldn't allow 2 civilians to accompany them. Uraraka questioned Izaya about being quirkless, surprising everyone, especially Melissa, who realized that he understood her struggles. Ignoring the comments, Deku continued up the stairs, determined to take action. Everyone except Mirio lacked a provisional license, making them seem like ordinary civilians. They needed Melissa's help, as they were unfamiliar with the system. The speaker paused, looking back at the group, and expressed that being quirkless shouldn't hold him back. He hoped they weren't planning to leave him behind, as he would follow them regardless, which could be more dangerous than if he joined them. He insisted he wasn't useless. Mirio smiled at this determination and conceded that he wouldn't try to stop him. With that settled, the group raced up the stairs, all focused on thwarting Wolfram's plan. Their destination was the top floor. Deku inquired about the height of the building, and Melissa informed him it had 200 floors. Deku glanced at the floor indicator and noted they were barely on the 30th floor. Mineta complained about the number of stairs, prompting Deku to rush to Melissa and pick her up in a princess carry, insisting it was faster. Melissa protested, asking him to put her down, but he refused. They quickly ascended to the 80th floor, only to find their path blocked. Deku set Melissa down, breathing, and expressed concern about how to proceed without triggering an alarm. Melissa remarked on his stamina, to which he downplayed his efforts, claiming he worked out a lot. Mirio asked about his training regimen, but Deku insisted they needed to focus on finding a way forward. Mineta suggested going through a door that led into a hallway. Deku approached him, reminding him that he had been the one most worried about the villains, and opening that door might have alerted them. Mineta gulped, realizing his mistake. Mirio urged everyone to move quickly, leading the way with the others following closely. However, barriers began sealing off the hallway. Iida called out to Todoroki, who responded by shooting ice to stop one of the barriers. Iida then dashed past, using his speed to break through a door, urging everyone to hurry inside. They entered a large room filled with plants, and Deku asked what it was. Melissa explained that it was a research area for studying the effects of quirks on plant life. Suddenly, 𝐤𝐬 pointed out that someone was coming up in the elevator at the center of the room. Mineta whimpered at the thought of the villains finding them, and Deku sarcastically remarked on whose fault that might be. They quickly hid behind a cluster of bushes, hoping to remain undetected. As the villains arrived, one of them complained about the abundance of hiding spots. The group held their breath, crouching lower. One of the villains called out, claiming to see them. Deku recognized the voice. It was 𝗏𝗏𝐸, accompanied by Kirishima. One of the villains questioned their presence, and Kirishima attempted to defuse the situation by claiming they were lost and asking for directions. This angered one of the villains who threatened Kirishima, but before the attack could land, a large wall of ice appeared to block it. Todoroki then asked what 𝗏𝗏𝐸 was doing there. The ice began to shake as the villains tried to break through, prompting Todoroki to raise the rest of the group onto a platform. He instructed them to reach the system controls while he and the others held off the villains. Deku worried about being seen by 𝗏𝗏𝐸, but Iida and Melissa moved in front of him, offering their support. Kirishima was surprised to see them and asked what was happening. Todoroki explained that villains had taken over the tower. Meanwhile, the main group faced another blocked path on the next floor. Iida broke through the door, only to find the hallway blocked again. Frustrated, Kaminari shouted for a solution. Melissa pointed out a hatch in the ceiling that led to a maintenance room. If they could open it, someone could climb the outer wall and access a vent. Deku suggested Mineta for the task, but Mineta protested, fearing the height. Mirio explained that his quirk wouldn't help the group, and since they needed Melissa, he couldn't do it. Kaminari whispered something to Mineta, who then agreed to take on the challenge. A few minutes later, they found themselves in the maintenance room. Deku asked Kaminari what he had said, but Kaminari kept it a secret, hinting it was something inappropriate. As they continued, the path remained clear until they reached the 130th floor. Peeking into the next room, they discovered it was filled with security bots. Iida noted that the villains must have realized most of them were Hero Corps students. Mirio suggested it was time to execute their plan. Yaoyorozu used her quirk to create an electric-proof cloth to cover them. Kaminari then charged into the room, unleashing electricity, but the robots blocked his attacks, leaving him momentarily dazed. Deku had anticipated this outcome. Yaoyorozu quickly created devices that released gas to jam the robots' communications, while Mineta used his quirk to hinder them further. As they engaged in battle, Iida and Mirio charged in, dismantling the robots with precision. Deku approached Yaoyorozu with a request, and she nodded, producing a slender metal pole about 5 feet long. Grabbing it, Deku joined the fray alongside his friends. While the group provided support, the trio focused on taking down the robots. Deku dashed around, striking the robots with the pole and targeting vulnerable spots. Mirio skillfully dodged attacks, using his bare hands to deliver powerful blows. Iida kicked at obstacles and pulled Kaminari to safety. Eventually, the entire group managed to push through. Iida inquired if there was any backup, and J.𝐼𝐸 confirmed that more robots were approaching from the left. They decided to take the opposite route. Mirio expressed surprise at 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐬's reckless move, to which Deku responded with a mischievous smile, assuring them that the situation was under control. Grateful for the pole, he acknowledged Yaoyorozu's contribution. Continuing onward, they relied on J.𝐼𝐸's quirk to sense enemies ahead. However, they soon encountered a larger group of robots on the 138th floor. J.𝐼𝐸 realized that the robots must have temporarily deactivated to avoid detection. Mirio rallied the group, urging them to break through. Melissa warned them that they couldn't fight in the server room, as damage could compromise the island's security system. They decided that 𝐒𝐮𝐬, Melissa, and Mirio would search for an alternate route while the others held off the robots. Deku nodded and, along with Mirio, rushed out of the room. Melissa turned to Uraraka, insisting she join them. Despite her hesitation, Iida firmly stated that they might need her, prompting Uraraka to follow the others. With Melissa leading, they made their way outside to the wind power generator. Melissa instructed Uraraka to float them up to an emergency exit at the top. Uraraka complied, and as she lifted them, a horde of robots burst through the door behind them. Melissa shouted for Uraraka to get to safety, but Uraraka refused to leave until they were up. Just then, 𝗏𝗏𝐸 arrived, using his quirk to blast the robots away, while Todoroki encased the remaining ones in ice. Todoroki checked on Uraraka, who explained that she had sent Melissa, Mirio, and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 to the top. 𝗏𝗏𝐸 and Todoroki then prepared to fend off the remaining robots, with 𝗏𝐾𝐭 expressing his frustration at being ordered around. A sudden gust of wind pushed 𝗏𝐾𝐭 and Melissa away from the door, prompting Todoroki to instruct 𝗏𝐾𝐭 to aim one of the propellers at the robots. Despite his protests, 𝗏𝐾𝐭 complied, and Todoroki ignited the propeller, creating a blast of hot air that propelled them back toward the door. The trio quickly reached the top, and 𝗟𝗏𝐼 released her quirk, allowing them to safely enter the building. Once inside, Deku checked on everyone, and Melissa responded that they were fine. As Deku began to reply, he noticed movement and instinctively tackled Melissa to the ground, while 𝗟𝐼𝐽 activated his quirk just in time to avoid a deadly attack from a villain wielding a blade-like arm. Melissa demanded to know why the villain was attacking them, but before he could respond, 𝗟𝐼𝐽 charged in, delivering a decisive punch that sent the villain crashing to the ground. As the villain lost consciousness, he caught sight of Deku and began to recognize him, but his words were cut short. 𝗟𝐼𝐽 urged the group to keep moving, emphasizing that they were close to reaching their goal. They continued upward, and 𝗟𝐼𝐽 dispatched any villains they encountered along the way. Upon reaching the top floor, Deku asked about the control room's location. Melissa informed him that it was near the central elevator, but they soon spotted her father, David, inside. Melissa was puzzled by his presence, and Izuku speculated that he had been brought there for a specific purpose. They quietly approached, listening in on the conversation. David directed his assistant to unlock a storage container, revealing a case that contained a device capable of amplifying quirks. Melissa confronted her father, demanding to know if he was behind the incident. David's expression shifted from guilt to seriousness as he confirmed her suspicions. Melissa and 𝗟𝐼𝐽 gasped in disbelief, while Deku feigned shock to avoid raising suspicion. Melissa questioned her father's motives, and her father's assistant explained that the invention could enhance quirks without harming the brain, but their sponsors had shut down the project out of fear of its potential impact on society. Amid the chaos, various groups pressured David to bring an end to the turmoil. This was the reason behind his actions. Melissa struggled to comprehend the situation, feeling a sense of betrayal. She believed that the father she knew would never resort to villainous behavior, regardless of the circumstances. David's expression revealed his inner turmoil as he turned away, confessing that he had acted for all might. Deku, 𝗟𝐼𝐽, and Melissa were taken aback by this revelation. Deku's thoughts raced. If All Might was indeed in such a weakened state, it was more serious than he had imagined. David explained that All Might's quirk was fading, but with the device he had, All Might could regain his former strength, perhaps even surpass it. He pleaded to be allowed to return the device, willing to accept any consequences for his actions. As David spoke, Deku noticed 𝗟𝐼𝐽 deep in thought, clearly processing the gravity of the situation. Melissa, overwhelmed with emotion, reflected on the sacrifices made by everyone involved, her voice rising in distress as she recalled the dangers they faced while trying to save those on the island. David was taken aback by her outburst, confusion etched on his face as he questioned the reality of the villains being mere actors in a performance. Just then, Wolfram entered the scene, accompanied by one of his henchmen, revealing that the true act was their deception as real criminals. Before anyone could react, Wolfram used his powers to immobilize 𝗟𝐼𝐽 against the wall, while the ground surged up to ensnare Deku, dragging him toward Wolfram. Melissa, in a panic, rushed to 𝗟𝐼𝐽, desperate to free him from his restraints. Wolfram turned his attention to Deku, taunting him about his intentions. He introduced himself as 𝐒𝐮𝐽, explaining that he couldn't allow the students to be harmed, as they could be useful later. He pointed out 𝗟𝐼𝐽's ability to phase through objects, prompting Wolfram to search the room for him. Wolfram warned against resistance and approached David and Sam, demanding the device. Sam hurried to comply, handing it over with a sense of urgency. David's shock was palpable as he realized Sam had been part of this plan all along. Sam confronted David, expressing his feelings of betrayal after years of loyalty, claiming he deserved recognition for their work. Wolfram, uninterested in Sam's grievances, pulled out a weapon and shot him in the shoulder, causing Sam to collapse in pain. Wolfram approached, ready to finish the job, but 𝗟𝐼𝐽 suddenly emerged from below, disarming Wolfram with a swift punch. Wolfram retaliated by manipulating the ground to launch metal spikes at 𝗟𝐼𝐽, who skillfully dodged each attack. However, Wolfram's henchmen took the opportunity to knock out David. In a desperate attempt to protect Melissa, 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 rushed to her side but was unable to activate his quirk in time, resulting in a spike pinning him to the wall. Wolfram continued his assault, sending more projectiles at 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿, who finally activated his quirk to evade them and charged at Wolfram, who hastily activated barriers before fleeing with his accomplice and David. As Wolfram passed by, he loosened Deku's bindings, whispering that now Deku couldn't inform 𝐒𝐻𝐻 of his betrayal. Deku quickly freed himself just as 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 arrived, and they realized Wolfram was trying to escape. Deku instructed Melissa to reset the security system and free everyone while he and 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 pursued Wolfram. They raced down the hall, determined to stop him from escaping with the device. Outside on the helipad, they spotted Wolfram boarding a helicopter. Wolfram taunted 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿, questioning his intentions, but 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 declared his mission to save David from Wolfram's clutches, regardless of David's actions. As the confrontation escalated, Deku moved stealthily along the edge of the roof, keeping an eye on the fight. Just as they neared the helicopter, Wolfram aimed his weapon at David, causing 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 to hesitate. Seizing the moment, Wolfram attacked 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿, knocking him aside and boarding the helicopter. As the helicopter began to lift off, Deku made a daring move, grabbing onto the landing gear and pulling himself up. He was halfway inside when Wolfram finally noticed him. Deku looked up with a grin as he grabbed the briefcase containing the professor's device and research. He leaped away from the helicopter just as 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 jumped up to seize it. After landing, Deku noticed 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 descending rapidly, but a moment later, a large object soared through the helicopter, capturing both 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 and the professor. Deku thought to himself that all might had arrived. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a small device with a button, pressing it to reveal a portal before him. He hesitated, glancing back at his friends, weighing his options. Ultimately, he decided to step through the portal, leaving the briefcase behind. The individuals who had taken it were right, such a device shouldn't be on the streets. He reminded himself that taking it would only lead to a search, and it was only a matter of time before they discovered his identity. Sitting on a bench, he hummed to himself, lost in thought for half an hour. Shigaraki was plotting yet another attack on the school, this time with a clear objective: to shatter society's hope and faith in heroes during their summer training camp. However, he had not shared the specifics with Deku, and it was this operation that had brought Deku to his current location. His thoughts were interrupted when he spotted his target approaching the school. Standing up, he crossed the street and called out to her. Uraraka turned at the sound of his voice, surprise quickly morphing into annoyance as she waved a fist at him. She expressed her concern over his sudden disappearance, revealing that everyone had been worried about him. Deku rubbed the back of his neck, feeling sheepish as he explained that he had gone to his hotel after the chaos, only to leave unexpectedly the next day. He would have said goodbye, but he didn't know where they were or have anyone's number. Uraraka, frustrated, pulled out her phone and offered it to him, insisting they exchange numbers to avoid future excuses. As she blushed slightly, Deku smiled, finding the situation easier than he expected. He entered his number, apologizing for worrying everyone. She took back her phone, reminding him that she had to hurry to her summer training camp to catch the bus. Without another word, she rushed past him, leaving Deku to ponder her irritation over his abrupt departure. As he walked back to the bar, someone emerged from a nearby alley and joined him. Toga cheerfully asked if Uraraka was his girlfriend. Deku dismissed her, quickening his pace while she pouted and followed. They soon arrived at the train station and traveled to the bar. Once inside, Toga clung to him again, despite his attempts to push her away. He reiterated that she couldn't drink his BLD or cut him, to which she replied that he would look better covered in it and that the taste would be delightful. Shigaraki observed them for a moment before clearing his throat to get their attention. He inquired if Deku had succeeded in his task. Deku finally managed to free himself from Toga's grasp and confirmed that he had placed a tracking chip on one of the students' phones. If everything went according to plan, it would lead them directly to the camp. Shigaraki acknowledged the benefit of Deku befriending the students and asked about any suspicions regarding his actions at 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿. Deku assured him that they believed his story, which, while not entirely false, had been framed around his fictional journalist job. Shigaraki smiled, and Deku felt a wave of discomfort at the thought of using the students for their plans. They had been kind to him even knowing he was quirkless, and he felt guilty for taking advantage of their trust. He shook off the thoughts, reminding himself that he was a villain, and nothing could change that. His fate had been sealed the moment All for One took an interest in him, and once the truth was revealed, even those who had treated him kindly would turn against him. Curious about the operation, Deku asked how they planned to undermine faith in heroes, noting that mere attacks wouldn't suffice. Shigaraki dismissed his concerns, assuring him that the plan would significantly damage Yue's reputation. With everything in place, he told Deku he was dismissed. Deku glared at Shigaraki, frustrated by his secrecy and attitude, before turning to leave with Toga trailing closely behind. She asked if she could accompany him home, and when he merely grunted in response, she gasped in surprise. Deku spoke without turning to look at Toga, indicating that he was heading to work out. He mentioned that she could join him if she wanted, but that was all. Toga frowned slightly but decided to follow him. A few minutes later, they found themselves inside the gym where Deku trained. Toga took a seat on a bench, observing as Deku worked on a punching bag. After several minutes, Deku paused and glanced at Toga, questioning her fighting skills. Toga, who had been lounging on the bench, sat up and replied that she could stab and cut people. When Deku asked about her abilities without a knife, Toga thought for a moment before shaking her head. Deku sighed, expressing concern that her limited fighting knowledge could be problematic if she were ever captured. He offered to teach her a few pointers, even though he couldn't turn her into an expert fighter before their operation the next night. Toga hesitated, asking if she had to participate. Deku explained that it would be beneficial for her to learn, and if she did, they would have some one-on-one time together. This motivated Toga, who perked up and jogged over to him, eager to learn. Deku decided to teach her some simple counters and moves, given their limited time. A couple of hours later, he complimented her on her progress. Toga, completely exhausted, groaned in response. Deku smirked down at her before checking the time. Realizing they had missed lunch, he offered to treat her to dinner as an apology. Toga's eyes lit up at the suggestion, and she quickly sat up, excited. Deku instructed her to wash up and change her clothes, suggesting they meet back in about half an hour. As Toga left, Deku began tidying up. He was soon approached by 𝗟𝗶𝐻, who commented on how well they seemed to be getting along. Deku acknowledged that Toga was a good person, despite her tendency to get a bit messy. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 remarked that it also helped that Toga was interested in him, and he hinted that he was too. Deku paused, feeling flattered but clarifying that he didn't share those feelings. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 explained that Deku's survival against Stain and his impressive feats had drawn attention, suggesting that many were watching him. Deku reflected on 𝗟𝗶𝐻's words, surprised by his own accomplishments. He turned off the lights and left the gym, heading back to his place. 40 minutes later, Deku and Toga were seated in a cozy corner of a cafe. Toga wore her usual outfit, while Deku was dressed in black jeans, a black t-shirt, a baseball cap, a green jacket, a face mask, and gloves. Toga asked him why he was dressed that way, noting that people thought he was dead. Deku explained that he had no need to hide his face earlier, but now it was better to be cautious. As they talked, a bell jingled, signaling the entrance of two familiar figures. Deku's mother, 𝐒𝐮𝐬, and Mitsuki, Bakugo's mom, walked in. Toga noticed the resemblance between 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and Deku and realized the situation was precarious. Deku quickly pulled up the hood of his jacket and adjusted his mask to conceal his face before they could see him. He placed money on the table to cover their bill and hurried toward the exit, but he paused when he overheard his mother speaking. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 expressed how much she missed her son, still struggling to believe he was gone. Mitsuki comforted her, acknowledging the difficulty of such a loss. Overwhelmed, Deku stepped outside, tempted to reveal himself and embrace his mother. However, he knew he couldn't, as he was part of the League and things could never return to how they once were. As he walked along the street with a large briefcase, the sun began to set, and his phone rang. Answering it, he heard Uraraka's voice on the other end. She checked in on him, hoping she wasn't interrupting. Deku reassured her that he was just out for a walk while waiting for his next job. 𝐼𝐻𝐼𝐸 mentioned that she had told everyone about meeting him the previous day, and they wanted to talk. Deku felt a sense of dread, anticipating their reactions. Mina's voice came through, expressing their worry about him. He reminded them that they didn't know the full story and that he had a valid reason for leaving suddenly. Yaoyorozu chimed in, noting that Ito was at another table with Todoroki, Kirishima, and Bakugo, leaving just the girls to discuss things with him. In a panicked tone, Deku asked for Yaoyorozu's support in defending him. He wasn't particularly fond of what they had said, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. It was inconsiderate, and he felt the weight of their disappointment. He realized he must have really messed up to upset the cheerful and diligent girls. He offered to make it up to them, immediately regretting his words as he heard them whispering among themselves. He urged them to hold back on their requests, explaining that there was only so much he could do. One of the girls mentioned that being a journalist and information broker should earn him a decent amount of money, and they expected him to treat them once they returned from camp. He protested, reminding them that he wasn't made of money. Another girl chimed in, saying it was his fault for making them worry. With a sigh, he conceded that he would treat them to lunch or something when they could all go together, but he warned them not to expect anything fancy. He suggested they schedule a day to see if he would be available. As he ended the call, he heard a voice behind him. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 commented on how interesting the conversation sounded and teased him about not wanting Toga to find out. Deku explained that the girls were just friends from UA and that he needed to treat them as an apology. He added that he preferred not to let Toga know, fearing her reaction. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 joked about their relationship, but Deku insisted it wasn't like that. He acknowledged that while Toga was nice, she had a wild side. He opened the door to the bar, eager to avoid Shigaraki's complaints about being late. Inside, he noticed most of their group was present. The plan was for most of them to go that night, while others would join the following night for the mission. Toga greeted him, and he shot 𝗟𝗶𝐻 a look to keep quiet, which 𝗟𝗶𝐻 acknowledged with a smirk. Toga showed off her gear, expressing her dissatisfaction with it. Deku apologized but reminded her that it would serve its purpose. 𝗟𝗏 announced that it was time, and everyone gathered, preparing for their departure. In an instant, they were transported to a cliff overlooking a forest, with the camp lights twinkling in the distance. Deku mentally prepared himself for the attack planned for the next day. As they waited, the group ensured they were ready. Deku dressed in his costume and conducted a final inventory check before heading out for some quick reconnaissance. Once he returned, they waited for nightfall and the arrival of the rest of the group. When the time came, a portal opened, bringing in 𝗏𝗏, Twice, and a Nomu equipped with chainsaws for arms. Deku confirmed that everyone was present and reminded them of the plan. They moved to their designated positions, with Deku tasked to find Eraserhead and hold him off. It was decided that he was best suited for this role since he didn't have a quirk to rely on. He planned to reach the main facility first before searching for other targets. Meanwhile, 𝗟𝗶𝐻 would set the forest ablaze, and Twice would send copies of himself to attack the facility, regardless of who was there. Magna and Spinner were assigned to engage the main group of students and delay the heroes accompanying them. Mustard would use his gas to incapacitate those caught in it, limiting the heroes' actions. The rest were instructed to wander and attack students while also fulfilling a request from Shigaraki that he had not disclosed to Deku. As Deku ran along the cliffside, he observed the various members launching their assault. He thought to himself that while he didn't know Shigaraki's full plan, nobody would forget this night. The forest was ablaze, Mustard's gas would incapacitate many, and numerous students would be injured. Suddenly, he noticed something unusual and stopped. A nearby section of the cliff was cracked and damp, as if struck by a powerful jet of water. Realizing that no one in their group possessed such a quirk, he instinctively heightened his guard and focused on his surroundings. He detected voices nearby and followed the sound, discovering Muscular and a small child wearing a hat with 2 horns. The child turned to flee, clearly terrified of the imposing villain, and Deku could see Muscular tense, preparing to leap. Deku rushed out and positioned himself between them just as Muscular landed in front of the boy. He commanded Muscular to stand down, questioning his presence when he was supposed to be out causing chaos. Muscular, unimpressed, revealed he had come to witness the destruction but had stumbled upon the frightened child. He taunted Deku about his duty to fight 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐿. The boy whispered in fear, identifying Muscular as a villain. Deku urged the child to escape, insisting he wasn't their target. Muscular, however, expressed his eagerness to harm the boy, revealing his violent nature. Deku took a step back, realizing the danger Muscular posed. His instinct to protect the boy clashed with the fear of confronting such a ruthless opponent. He resolved that leaving would be tantamount to abandoning the child, a notion he could not accept. Even after embracing the role of a villain, a part of Deku remained unchanged. The last comment he heard had ignited a spark of anger within him. He glanced back at the boy and advised him to run when he saw an opening. The boy, confused, questioned why Deku, a villain, was helping him. Deku offered a smile, uncertain of his own motivations. He acknowledged his villainous nature but insisted he wasn't as cruel as others. He simply couldn't allow the boy to perish. With that, he turned his attention back to Muscular, adopting a fighting stance and challenging his opponent. Muscular, shedding his cloak and cracking his knuckles, expressed his eagerness to crush Deku. He charged forward with remarkable speed, but Deku unleashed gas from his gauntlets, disrupting Muscular's aim and allowing him to narrowly evade the attack. Before Muscular could retaliate, Deku leaped back and hurled a knife at Muscular's face, forcing him to block with his arm. Deku urged the boy to seize the moment and escape. As soon as Deku spoke, the boy dashed away. Muscular attempted to intercept him, but Deku threw 2 more knives, compelling Muscular to halt and defend himself. Muscular grunted, noting Deku's affinity for knives despite claiming not to kill. Deku explained that a weapon is merely a tool that, in the right hands, can incapacitate without causing death. Muscular dismissed this, asserting that it would take more than that to stop him. He activated his quirk, causing his muscles to swell dramatically. He boasted that Deku stood no chance and should surrender. Deku shook his head, identifying Muscular's quirk as muscle augmentation, which allowed him to manipulate his muscles at will. He elaborated that while Muscular's strength and durability were impressive, there were vulnerabilities. Muscular's muscles could still be harmed, and if he were to lose sensation or consciousness, his size would be meaningless. As Deku spoke, Muscular grew increasingly uneasy. Deku aimed his gun at Muscular, issuing a final warning to back down or face defeat. Muscular's anger flared. A seasoned killer was being challenged by a quirkless boy. He charged at Deku in a rage. Anticipating this, Deku activated a smoke bomb he had prepared earlier. While Muscular swung wildly, Deku utilized the infrared feature of his mask to track him, dodging the attacks while deploying a numbing solution similar to what he had used before. Muscular's frustration boiled over as he amplified his quirk. Deku observed that the areas affected by his attacks were not growing as quickly, but were being compensated by other muscles. Realizing he needed a change in strategy due to limited ammunition, Deku switched magazines in both guns. As the smoke began to dissipate, Muscular spotted Deku and charged once more. In a split-second decision, Deku leaped off the cliff, surprising Muscular, who expected a different maneuver. However, Deku was not attempting to escape. He fired a grappling hook from his gauntlet, swinging it around to ensnare Muscular's neck. Caught off guard, Muscular was yanked toward the cliff's edge by Deku's sudden weight. As Muscular struggled to free himself, Deku activated the grappling hook, propelling himself upward and delivering a knee strike to Muscular's face. Without wasting a moment, Deku used a knife to sever the grappling hook's cable and drew his guns, firing tranquilizers at Muscular as he attempted to rise. Although the tranquilizers had limited effect due to Muscular's massive physique, they did cause some of his muscles to shrink as he lost feeling. Muscular growled, adjusting his artificial eye and declaring it was time to get serious. Deku realized that Muscular had been holding back until now, fully utilizing his left eye and growing even larger. Before Deku could react, Muscular was upon him, launching a punch that sent Deku crashing against the cliffside. Muscular seized Deku's leg, lifting him and slamming him into the ground multiple times. Just as Muscular prepared to stomp on him, Deku rolled aside, narrowly avoiding the crushing blow. Muscular reached for him again, but Deku threw an ice grenade, momentarily disorienting him. Taking advantage of the distraction, Deku retreated into the smoke to assess his injuries. His left arm and right leg were broken, and he felt several ribs were fractured. He had a healing drag, but it would take too long to work and would only leave him fatigued. As he stood, he spotted one of his guns nearby, having fallen during the earlier confrontation. He retrieved it just as Muscular charged out of the smoke, and Deku fired at the areas where Muscular's muscles were less dense. The shots weakened Muscular slightly, but he quickly closed the distance. Exhausted and in pain, Deku found himself unable to escape as Muscular grasped his head. Muscular acknowledged Deku's unexpected resilience, feeling the effects of the tranquilizers coursing through him. But it wasn't enough, and it definitely wasn't fast enough. Despite having learned a few tricks since joining the league, when faced with real power, Deku found himself powerless. Muscular slowly tightened his grip around Deku's head, squeezing as he spoke. Deku attempted to reach for one of his weapons or tools, but as Muscular applied more pressure, he felt his consciousness slipping away, unable to grasp what he had before it fell from his hand. He thought to himself that he couldn't go out like this, not after everything he had endured. He had worked too hard to lose now. A mix of pain, anger, frustration, and anguish surged within him as he let out a desperate scream. Just before he lost consciousness, a bright flash caught his eye, accompanied by loud roars and bangs. Muscular's voice echoed, sounding almost as if he were in pain. Suddenly, Muscular released him, and Deku collapsed to the ground. The sounds around him began to fade, but the roaring persisted, enveloping him as he stared up at the stars, drifting into unconsciousness. When Deku's eyes opened again, confusion and a hint of terror filled him. The last thing he remembered was Muscular about to crush his skull, followed by that blinding light and the cacophony of sounds. He tried to sit up but winced as sharp pains shot through his body. Gradually, he propped himself against the cliffside, using a healing drag to numb the pain before surveying his surroundings. He had expected the area to be devastated by Muscular's attacks, but instead he found only a few scorch marks. Near the edge, he spotted Muscular lying face down, seemingly unconscious and covered in burns. Deku wondered if 𝗟𝗶𝐻 had come to his aid. Scanning the area, he saw no signs of anyone else but himself and Muscular. Most of his gear, especially the explosives, were missing. Perhaps his equipment had triggered some kind of fire. He had carried items capable of igniting, which, when combined, could create a powerful explosion. While 𝗟𝗶𝐻 was known for leaving scorch marks, he should have been elsewhere. As the effects of the drags took hold, Deku managed to stand shakily, still leaning against the wall. He looked over himself and realized something puzzling: there wasn't a single burn on him. While Deku was piecing together what had happened, Koda was nearing the facility when he encountered the pro hero 𝐒𝐻𝐬, who was leaving to provide backup for 𝗏𝗏𝐿 and Tiger. Koda urgently called for help, explaining that he had been attacked by one of the villains, but another had intervened while he escaped. He mentioned running into one of 𝐒𝐻𝐬's students, who had rushed off to help. 𝐒𝐻𝐬, sensing the gravity of the situation, asked for a description of the villains. Koda wiped his nose and revealed that the attacker was Muscular, the villain responsible for his parents' deaths, while the other was a short figure in a vest and tie wearing a mask. After instructing Koda to head to the facility where Vlad King was, Aizawa rushed to the location Koda had indicated. He couldn't shake the feeling of dread as he wondered why Iida had run off toward both Muscular and Deku. It seemed reckless, especially since Deku had shown signs of not being a villain. Aizawa questioned why Deku would risk himself to save a random boy, especially when it was believed that Koda lacked a quirk. Meanwhile, Deku had regained enough strength to walk and approached Muscular cautiously. Upon getting closer, he realized the burns were not as severe as he had initially thought. Not wanting to take any chances, he retrieved 2 tranquilizers and injected them into Muscular's neck. As Deku stood up, preparing to remove his mask for fresh air, he sensed he was being watched. Turning around, he spotted Iida standing there, breathing. Panic surged through Deku as he realized he barely had the strength to stand and wouldn't be able to fend him off. Hoping to intimidate Iida into leaving, Deku drew his last gun and aimed it at him, warning him to leave or face dire consequences. Instead of retreating, Ida raised his hands and took slow steps forward, assuring Deku he meant no harm and just wanted to talk. Frustrated, Deku insisted there was nothing to discuss and threatened to shoot if Ida didn't turn around. Ida smiled softly, asserting that Deku lacked the heart to kill anyone, knowing there was goodness within him. As Ida closed the distance, Deku, in a state of panic, fired a warning shot into the ground near him before aiming again. He insisted that was his only warning and told Ida to stop pretending to know him. Ida, undeterred, maintained his smile and claimed he truly knew Deku, calling him his friend. This revelation caused Deku to take a step back, recalling what 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐿 had told him the previous night. He wondered if Ida had spoken with Bakugo and made the connection. Ida reiterated his longing to talk, but Deku dismissed him, suspecting he was merely stalling until the professionals arrived. Ida insisted he had questions and reminded Deku of the trust they had built back in Hosu, urging him to trust him now, especially as he struggled to remain standing. Deku hesitated, then sighed, dropping the gun and collapsing onto the ground. He acknowledged that he likely didn't have much time before he passed out again and asked Ida what he wanted to know. Ida squatted before him, asking why Deku had chosen to help Koda and show mercy instead of embracing the villainous path he was expected to follow. Deku met Ida's gaze and simply replied that there was no reason not to. It might be challenging to grasp since perspectives often seem black and white. However, the reality is that the world exists in various shades of gray. Vigilantes operate outside the law, typically to assist others. Stain was a killer who sought a better society. Some heroes pursue fame and fortune instead of true justice. That is why I consider myself a villain who adheres to my own principles and standards. Ida frowned upon hearing this. He questioned why the individual didn't attempt to become a hero, insisting that despite their claims, they possessed a hero's heart. The response came from behind Deku, where 𝐼𝐻𝐿 and Shigaraki stood. 𝐼𝐻𝐿 explained that society had forced this person into the shadows, subjecting them to rejection and mistreatment for something beyond their control. Eventually, they could no longer endure it. The League had offered them a sense of belonging, empowering them instead of tearing them down. Shigaraki reached out toward Ida, his intentions clear. Ida, shocked and frightened, found himself unable to move as the hand approached. Deku intervened, urgently calling for Shigaraki to stop. He quickly retrieved his weapon and incapacitated Ida, turning to confront the villain. He asserted that there was no need for violence, invoking the conditions he had established upon joining the League. Shigaraki growled in response, clarifying that the deal to spare lives applied only to family and loved ones, not to every adversary they encountered. Deku pleaded for Ida's life, but 𝐼𝐻𝐿 reminded them that they needed to leave as the heroes would soon arrive. Shigaraki cast one last glance at Ida before departing through 𝐼𝐻𝐿's portal, stating that Ida would live to see another day. He warned Deku that he wouldn't always be there to protect him, emphasizing that it was individuals like Ida who had contributed to his current situation. He then instructed 𝐼𝐻𝐿 to leave Muscular behind, deeming him more trouble than he was worth. Deku slowly rose to his feet and limped through the portal after them. Before he could fully enter, he heard a voice behind him. 𝐿, breathing, informed him that he was too late to intervene but reassured him that Ida was merely unconscious. With that, Deku stepped through, followed by 𝐼𝐻𝐿, who closed the portal behind them. Upon arrival, Deku found himself in his apartment instead of the bar. 𝐼𝐻𝐿 explained that he had sustained numerous injuries and needed rest. They would discuss matters later, and 𝐼𝐻𝐿 would return in 2 days to transport him back to the bar, providing the details later. Deku nodded silently before heading to the shower to tend to his wounds. Exhausted from the long night, he eventually fell asleep. The following day he awoke to discover that 18 hours had passed. He expressed surprise at how tired he had been. A voice responded, revealing 𝐼𝐻𝐿 seated in a corner. Deku was taken aback, realizing 𝐼𝐻𝐿 had healed him again. 𝐼𝐻𝐿 confirmed that while Deku had used a healing drag, it would have taken much longer without his assistance. Deku thanked him and then recalled something troubling him. He mentioned a strange sensation during his previous healing and the unusual events of the previous night. He looked at 𝐒𝐻𝐻 with a serious expression, questioning whether he had given him a quirk. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 shook his head, clarifying that he would never impose such a thing on him, nor did he believe Deku would want one. Deku admitted that while he had always desired a quirk, he wouldn't accept power that way, as it would imply he was nothing without it. He wanted to achieve his goals using his own abilities. Reflecting on the previous night, he described seeing a bright light and hearing noises during his encounter with Muscular. When he regained consciousness, he noticed scorch marks around him and that Muscular had been severely burned, yet he himself had no injuries. He urged 𝐒𝐻𝐻 to reveal what had happened. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 sighed and explained that he had 𝗟𝗏 keep watch over him. He confirmed that it was neither dabi nor anything Deku had used that caused the phenomenon. Deku, now frustrated and confused, demanded to know what had occurred. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 agreed to explain, elaborating on the events of that night. Deku sat in stunned silence as he absorbed the information. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 had left some time ago, but Deku remained frozen, grappling with the revelations. Two key points angered him. 𝐒𝐻𝐻 revealed that All Might 2 had been quirkless before gaining one for all, and that the operation he had been involved in was aimed at capturing 𝗏𝗏𝐽 to recruit him into the league. For Deku, Shigaraki had crossed a line this time. Determined, Deku donned his villain outfit, excluding the mask and gloves, but he carried his mask as he made his way to the bar. He needed to confront Shigaraki. Moments later, he stood at the entrance, putting on his mask before bursting through the door. Shigaraki turned to face him from the bar, and in the center of the room, 𝗏𝗏𝐽 was tied to a chair. Upon seeing Deku, 𝗏𝗏𝐽 began to shout at him. Next to him was Tokoyami, the student with the bird-like features. Deku declared that Shigaraki had gone too far this time. Deku confronted Tokoyami, expressing disbelief that he had not only kidnapped 𝗏𝗏𝐽 but also brought someone else along. He adjusted 𝗏𝗏𝐽's bindings, noting that if they intended to keep him restrained, they needed better lighting to prevent him from using his quirk to escape. Approaching Shigaraki, Deku leaned in close, ensuring only Shigaraki could hear him. He revealed that his mentor had informed him of Shigaraki's plans and warned him that 𝗏𝗏𝐽 would never join their cause, nor would Tokoyami. Shigaraki regarded Deku with a cold stare, dismissing his concerns and asserting his decision to recruit 𝗏𝗏𝐽 into the league. Ignoring 𝗏𝗏𝐽's presence until that moment, Deku turned around, ready to retaliate, but 𝗏𝗏𝐽 only escalated his outburst. He declared that once he was free he would take revenge on Deku, insisting that his place would always be above him, regardless of the mask Deku wore. Deku glanced at Shigaraki, who shook his head, indicating he had said nothing. Realizing 𝗏𝗏𝐽 recognized him, Deku had an idea. He approached 𝗟𝗏𝐽 and whispered a request, prompting 𝗟𝗏𝐽 to nod and exit through a portal. Shigaraki inquired about 𝗟𝗏𝐽's destination, to which Deku responded with a light chuckle, urging him to wait and trust him. He then turned back to 𝗏𝗏𝐽, delivering a punch that silenced him. Deku reflected on how 𝗏𝗏𝐽 still saw him as the same boy he had bullied in childhood, but he was no longer that person. Suddenly, a portal opened behind Deku, and 𝗟𝗏𝐽 emerged, accompanied by another version of Deku. This new Deku was in tattered jeans, shirtless, and still scrawny with green hair, representing the boy Izuku Midoriya. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 stared in disbelief, realizing that the Deku he had known was now standing beside a villain. Tokoyami, unfamiliar with Izuku, looked on in confusion, which Deku noticed. Deku feigned surprise, questioning why 𝗏𝗏𝐽 had not shared the story of his childhood friend. He pulled Izuku forward, ready to recount their past. He explained how they had been friends as children, with 𝗏𝗏𝐽 excelling at everything while Izuku followed closely behind. When 𝗏𝗏𝐽 discovered he had a quirk and Izuku did not, he began to treat Izuku poorly. As Deku threw Izuku to the ground, he heard 𝗏𝗏𝐽's quiet plea for him to stop but ignored it, continuing with the narrative. He painted a picture of Izuku's perseverance, despite the bullying and abuse he faced from 𝗏𝗏𝐽 and others, even from teachers. It was remarkable that Izuku had managed to keep smiling through it all. Izuku looked down, pain evident on his face, while Deku noticed a tear rolling down 𝗏𝗏𝐽's cheek, realizing that guilt was finally hitting him. Deku continued the story, recalling a pivotal moment nearly a year ago. He prompted 𝗏𝗏𝐽 to remember his last words to Izuku, but 𝗏𝗏𝐽 shook his head, begging for it to stop. 𝗏𝗏𝐽, confused, asked what 𝗏𝗏𝐽 had done. Deku turned to Izuku, who was now silently crying. He encouraged Izuku to share his experience, stating that 𝗏𝗏𝐽 had ruined his life and it was only fair for him to speak up. Izuku looked up, glaring at 𝗏𝗏𝐽 as he recounted how 𝗏𝗏𝐽 had told him to give up on his dreams of attending UA, labeling him as worthless. He recalled how 𝗏𝗏𝐽 had suggested a drastic course of action, urging him to jump from the roof and hope to be reborn with a quirk. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 gasped at this revelation, realizing the extent of 𝗏𝗏𝐽's cruelty. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 protested, insisting that Izuku would never have the courage to follow through with such a suggestion. Deku leaned closer, challenging 𝗏𝗏𝐽's assumption. He explained that Izuku had left school not out of fear but because he wanted to protect 𝗏𝗏𝐽 from the consequences of his words. On his way home, Izuku was attacked by a villain, the sludge villain, who had previously targeted 𝗏𝗏𝐽. Deku stepped back, gesturing dramatically as he recounted how All Might had intervened, saving Izuku from the villain's grasp. However, instead of offering encouragement, All Might had told Izuku to give up, reinforcing the notion that a quirkless boy could never become a hero, just like everyone else in his life had. After enduring years of mistreatment from his classmates, it was his idol who ultimately shattered his dreams. Both students appeared incredulous at the revelation. Deku shared that the individual in question had finally taken 𝗏𝗏𝐽's advice and planned to climb to a building's roof that night, contemplating a leap. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 dismissed the notion, insisting that the person lacked the courage and was still present, indicating he hadn't gone through with it. Deku confirmed that while the individual hadn't jumped, he never had the opportunity. The League had found him and offered an invitation, providing a sense of belonging and acceptance despite his lack of a quirk. Deku brandished a knife handed to him by 𝗏𝗏𝐽 and, after some contemplation, the individual chose to join the League, marking the night Izuku Midoriya ceased to exist. As Deku spoke those final words, he turned to face Izuku and made a swift motion, causing a transformation rather than a fall. Deku stood, removing his mask and letting it drop. He revealed that someone had taken Izuku's place, a name 𝗏𝗏𝐽 had once coined. With a smile, he addressed 𝗏𝗏𝐽, acknowledging that he had never truly become a hero. Deku chuckled at the shocked expressions on the faces of his peers, but 𝗏𝗏𝐽's anger quickly flared again. He vehemently rejected Deku's claims, asserting that he would never have attempted to jump and that he was still the same weak nerd. Deku prepared to retaliate when Shigaraki intervened, instructing him to hold back. He had plans for the boy and didn't want him harmed. Instead, he suggested Deku take out his frustration on the other student, whom he had no intention of recruiting. 𝗏𝗏𝐽, sensing the tension, felt apprehensive about the situation. Yet, Deku reassured him that he meant no harm and was merely frustrated with 𝗏𝗏𝐽's presence. He picked up his helmet and placed it on the bar, reflecting on his earlier outburst and expressing remorse for the fate of the double created by twice Quirk. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 scoffed at Deku's feelings, insisting he remained a coward. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 urged 𝗏𝗏𝐽 to cease his provocations. Deku laughed, reminding 𝗏𝗏𝐽 of a past encounter where he had bested him. He then expressed sympathy for 𝗏𝗏𝐽, who had been captured despite not being a target. Deku proposed that Shigaraki allow him to take 𝗏𝗏𝐽, suggesting he could find a purpose for him and keep him in check. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 was taken aback by this offer, while Shigaraki hesitated, concerned about the potential consequences of letting 𝗏𝗏𝐽 go. Deku assured Shigaraki that he would ensure 𝗏𝗏𝐽 wouldn't escape and would take full responsibility if anything went wrong. Shigaraki, intrigued by Deku's confidence, agreed to the arrangement but warned that any mistakes would result in consequences for both of them. Deku nodded and proceeded to untie 𝗏𝗏𝐽, disregarding 𝗏𝗏𝐽's protests. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 questioned Deku's motives, to which Deku replied that he was simply trying to assist him. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 then transported them to Deku's home, where he encouraged 𝗏𝗏𝐽 to trust Deku's intentions. After 𝗏𝗏𝐽 departed, Deku sighed, tossing his helmet onto the couch before heading to the kitchen, offering to make tea. Confused, 𝗏𝗏𝐽 followed, questioning Deku's sudden change in demeanor. Deku clarified that he had a strict no-kill policy, though he admitted 𝗏𝗏𝐽 had a unique ability to provoke him. As he handed 𝗏𝗏𝐽 a cup of tea, he settled at the table with his own. 𝗏𝗏𝐽, still puzzled, asked why Deku had saved him, given his villainous status. Deku raised an eyebrow, assuring 𝗏𝗏𝐽 that there was no poison in the tea. He confessed that he wasn't entirely sure why he had acted as he did, but he felt compelled to help. He explained that he didn't want 𝗏𝗏𝐽 to suffer for something he hadn't done, and being transformed into a Nomu would be a dreadful fate for anyone. Ultimately, he believed his identity as a villain was irrelevant in this situation. Though he might be seen as a villain, he didn't consider himself evil, and many villains shared that sentiment. Heroes and villains were not synonymous with good and evil. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 was taken aback by this perspective. He had never thought of it that way. It was true, they were different. He took a sip of the tea, finding it sweet and refreshing. Deku mentioned that it was his special blend. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 then asked what would happen to him, unsure of how to respond. He wondered if he would be forced to fight. Deku assured him that he wouldn't be compelled to do anything against his will, but he would be working for him. He suggested that 𝗏𝗏𝐽 could be his assistant, helping to organize his tasks. When 𝗏𝗏𝐽 inquired about what that entailed, Deku explained that he wasn't a field agent and didn't typically go on missions like the one from the previous night. His work mainly involved espionage and analyzing quirks. He reassured 𝗏𝗏𝐽 that he would be safe under his care, asking only for his cooperation. At that moment, Deku received a phone call, and 𝗏𝗏𝐽 noticed his sudden tension. He instructed 𝗏𝗏𝐽 to remain silent during the call. Sensing the seriousness of the situation, 𝗏𝗏𝐽 nodded in understanding. Deku answered the call, greeting 𝗟𝗏 and expressing concern for her well-being after hearing about the recent events. Meanwhile, at UA, All Might stepped out of the meeting room to take his call. He and the teachers had just been discussing the recent attack on the training camp, where several students and a pro hero had been injured. To make matters worse, a pro hero was missing, and 2 students had been kidnapped. The situation was dire, and the media was heavily criticizing them, though their concerns were valid. No one knew how the League of Villains had discovered the camp, and while the possibility of a traitor was raised, there was no concrete evidence. 𝗟𝗏𝐿 had likely been taken due to his aggressive behavior at the sports festival, which made sense. However, 𝗏𝗏𝐽's abduction puzzled him. What purpose could he serve for? The villains. He had learned from the report that 𝗏𝗏𝐽 had been captured alongside 𝗏𝗏𝐽. Regardless, All Might was determined to rescue them both, even at great personal cost. All Might felt a deep sense of shame and guilt for not being there to protect his students. He checked his phone and saw it was 𝗟𝗏𝐽 calling. After a brief exchange, 𝗟𝗏𝐽 informed All Might of an unexpected development that could lead them to the League of Villains hideout. One of his men had been investigating a location where a suspicious individual had been seen entering a seemingly vacant building. This led them to a bar within that building, and once they gathered enough evidence, they planned to raid the place. They wanted All Might and several other heroes to assist in the operation. All Might expressed his gratitude and promised that when he confronted the villains, he would make it clear he was there to settle the score. 𝗟𝗏𝐽 raised a concern about Deku potentially being present, which caused All Might to hesitate. He knew they would eventually cross paths, but he resolved that when that moment arrived, he would treat Deku as an adversary. With that, 𝗟𝗏𝐽 urged him to prepare, as they anticipated that the main villain would be involved. All Might knew he would need to enlist the help of his former mentor, a thought that filled him with dread. He couldn't shake the worry for the students who had been captured, especially Izuku Midoriya. Back at Deku's apartment, he hung up the phone and turned to 𝗏𝗏𝐽, acknowledging that this situation raised many questions. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 was surprised by Deku's calm demeanor amidst the chaos. Deku took the time to explain how he had met 𝗟𝗏 and Iida by chance, leading to encounters with more of 𝗏𝗏𝐽's classmates. 𝗏𝗏𝐽 struggled to comprehend how Deku had managed to meet them without revealing his identity. Deku admitted that if they knew who he truly was, he would likely be imprisoned by now. He expressed some regret, noting that since meeting them, his job had become increasingly difficult. He suggested they get some rest, offering 𝗏𝗏𝐽 the couch for the night and warning him against attempting to escape, as it could jeopardize them both. Afterward, Deku went to his room, leaving 𝗏𝗏𝐽 to ponder the situation. The next morning, 𝗏𝐼𝐬 awoke to the aroma of breakfast. He rubbed his eyes and saw Deku cooking in the kitchen. His quirk, Dark Shadow, communicated with him telepathically, questioning whether they could truly trust Deku. 𝗏𝐼𝐬 considered this, feeling uncertain about Deku's intentions. He reflected on Deku's past actions, recalling that he had injured Kirishima and Bakugo during the USJ incident, but it was clear that his motivations stemmed from a longing for revenge after years of mistreatment. Despite being labeled a villain, Deku had also helped him. Dark Shadow pointed out that Deku seemed unstable, recalling his emotional outburst while sharing his backstory. 𝗏𝐼𝐬 acknowledged that given his circumstances, things could be much worse. He sensed that Deku was struggling against his darker impulses, indicating that there was still goodness within him. However, Dark Shadow cautioned that alongside that goodness lay hatred and turmoil. The balance between those opposing forces was fragile, and it was evident that one day, something might disrupt that equilibrium. And if he surrendered to his darker side, there would be no turning back. Deku called out to them, announcing that breakfast was ready as he set 2 plates on the table. 𝗏𝐼𝐬 looked at him in surprise, wondering how he knew he was conversing with Dark Shadow. Deku explained that while it was uncommon, he wasn't the only one with a sentient quirk, and in many cases, both the quirk and its host could communicate telepathically. He added that 𝗏𝐼𝐬's expression suggested he was either deeply engaged in conversation or struggling with something else entirely. 𝗏𝐼𝐬 felt a blush creep onto his cheeks, questioning if he really looked that way. Deku chuckled, admitting he was just teasing him, then urged him to eat before the food grew cold. After their meal, Deku took 𝗏𝐼𝐬 on a brief tour of his home, elaborating on his work. He explained that 𝗏𝐼𝐬 would assist him in organizing and completing his analysis of quirks. 𝗏𝐼𝐬 expressed disbelief at how Deku could gather such detailed notes simply by observing others. He had flipped through one of the books out of curiosity, impressed by the meticulous breakdown of quirks, their weaknesses, and potential improvements. As they sorted through the notes, 𝗏𝐼𝐬 felt a sense of purpose. It was certainly a better option than becoming one of those gnome creatures, and for now, he would go along with Deku's plan until something changed. Deku handed 𝗏𝐼𝐬 a notebook from the sports festival, claiming it contained details about his quirk, while the others were filled with notes on various competitors. 𝗏𝐼𝐬's jaw dropped in astonishment, leaving him momentarily speechless. Deku laughed, understanding how rare it was for someone to take such thorough notes. 𝗏𝐼𝐬 stammered, still in shock, as Deku confirmed he had a monitor to assist him, explaining that he wasn't that fast on his own. However, 𝗏𝐼𝐬 remained amazed. Deku then shifted the conversation to one of 𝗏𝐼𝐬's classmates, Shoto Todoroki. He shared his observations from the festival, noting that Todoroki could manipulate both fire and ice, but seemed reluctant to use his fire side, even appearing disgusted by it. This had been weighing on Deku's mind for some time, especially after witnessing Todoroki's reaction during the cavalry battle. 𝗏𝐼𝐬 fell silent, unsure of how to respond. He didn't interact much with Todoroki and wasn't particularly social with his classmates. He finally offered that it might relate to Todoroki's father, 𝗟𝗏𝐿, who seemed to provoke anger in Todoroki whenever their relationship was mentioned. He admitted it was just a guess, as Todoroki kept to himself in Class 1A. Deku acknowledged this, sharing his own encounters with 𝗟𝗏𝐿, describing him as a violent and hot-tempered hero. 𝗏𝐼𝐬 agreed, expressing his concern for Todoroki, who sometimes appeared sad and hurt. Deku remained quiet, contemplating the psychological trauma that might be influencing Todoroki's reluctance to use his pyrokinetic abilities. 𝗏𝐼𝐬 glanced at the notebook containing his own quirk data, curious about Deku's analysis. He noted that relying heavily on Dark Shadow had left his close-quarters combat skills lacking. However, he found a suggestion in the improvement section that intrigued him. If he could wear Dark Shadow-like armor, it would enhance both his offense and defense. He imagined how Dark Shadow could carry him, similar to flying, and marveled at the innovative ideas Deku had presented. Deku interrupted 𝗏𝐼𝐬's thoughts, suggesting they grab lunch and finish their work later. The two teens moved to the kitchen to prepare their meal. As they cooked, 𝗏𝐼𝐬 admired Deku's skills and complimented him, prompting a smile from Deku. He explained that his experiences with spy and infiltration jobs had taught him many skills since joining the league. While he hadn't mastered everything, he had become decent at a variety of tasks, including cooking, art, music, science, and more. 𝐾𝐭𝐚𝐲 was astonished, questioning how anyone could have thought Deku was useless. Deku, surprised by the compliment, smiled back. He recalled how the girls in 𝐾𝐭𝐚𝐲's class had expressed admiration for his freelance work as a journalist and information broker, despite being quirkless. It had taken him by surprise, as only his mother and the league had seen past his lack of a quirk before. In that moment, 𝐾𝐭𝐚𝐲 placed a hand on Deku's shoulder. They were no longer just prisoner and warden, they were friends. The boy expressed his sincerity, and so did his companions. Although he had previously been surrounded by narrow-minded individuals, not everyone shared that mindset. It was reminiscent of what the Mist user had mentioned the day before: quirks were not everything. He reflected on how he wished he had met these individuals before the league discovered him, believing that perhaps things would have turned out differently. His companions shared that sentiment. After finishing lunch, the boy returned to his tasks, and they worked in silence for hours, uncertain of what to say next. Their quiet was finally broken when 𝐒𝐮𝐽 emerged through one of his portals. Deku was informed that Shigaraki wanted him to join him at the bar, along with 𝐾𝐭𝐚𝐲. With a roll of his eyes, Deku stood up, acknowledging that it might be a foolish endeavor or simply annoying, but he decided to go anyway. He insisted that 𝐾𝐽𝐚𝐲 should accompany him, assuring him of his protection. 𝐾𝐽𝐚𝐲 nodded and stood beside Deku. In an instant, they found themselves in the bar, where the rest of the league was gathered. Most of them were already aware of Deku's decision to take custody of 𝐾𝐽𝐚𝐲, so his presence did not surprise them. Meanwhile, various groups were preparing to make their move. The heroes and police were ready to raid the hideout to rescue the kidnapped students and address the Nomu warehouse. All Might was prepared to confront 𝐼𝐼𝐴, determined to put an end to the league and save his students. A group of students had tracked a villain to a warehouse, using a device created by Yaoyorozu, and a boy from Class 1B, Kirishima, perched on Ida's shoulders, used night vision binoculars to peer inside, shocked by the scene before him. Back at the bar, 𝐾𝐽𝐚𝐲 and Deku were watching a press conference from UA, and 𝐾𝐽𝐚𝐲 was troubled by the direction it was taking. The reporters were portraying the teachers and the school as the villains, despite the circumstances of the camp attack. He was particularly surprised by Mr. Aizawa's participation, given his disdain for the media. However, it made sense since he had been present during the event. The two were oblivious to Shigaraki's conversation with 𝐒𝐵akugo until an explosion jolted them back to reality. They turned to see 𝐒𝐵akugo freed, with the hand that usually obscured Shigaraki's face blown away. 𝐒𝐵akugo expressed his frustration, declaring that he could no longer remain silent. He made it clear that he would not be swayed by their offers, as he had already been inspired by All Might's victories. Deku shook his head, unfazed by the unfolding chaos, and returned his attention to the conference. A reporter questioned Aizawa about urging the students to fight, to which he and Nizu responded honestly, explaining that they had envisioned a scenario with potential casualties. The discussion shifted to the kidnapped students, with 𝐒𝐵akugo's behavior during the sports festival being scrutinized. Eraserhead took responsibility for 𝐒𝐵akugo's actions, stating that his strong convictions had been misinterpreted by the villains. Deku found humor in this, teasing Shigaraki, which prompted both Shigaraki and 𝐒𝐵akugo to tell him to be quiet before resuming their standoff. The conversation turned to 𝐾𝐽𝐚𝐲, with questions raised about whether he had been kidnapped to be used as a weapon. This made 𝐾𝐽𝐚𝐲 flinch, but Deku encouraged him to ignore the reporters, suggesting they were trying to provoke the school into making regrettable statements. 𝐾𝐽𝐚𝐲 nodded in agreement. Nizu assured everyone that they were actively collaborating with the police in their investigation, emphasizing their commitment to rescuing the students. 𝐒𝐵akugo expressed gratitude to UA for their support and issued threats to the league, asserting that he still had combat authorization and could take them on. Deku reminded 𝐒𝐵akugo that he was under his care, which held significance for some. Toga chimed in, affirming her support for Deku, while Dabi added his own remark, albeit with a slight twist. 𝐒𝐵akugo glared at Deku, vowing to inflict serious harm on him, wanting to remind Deku of his perceived weakness. Deku, however, welcomed the challenge unafraid of 𝐒𝐿𝐴's threats, having faced far more intimidating foes. 𝗟𝐿𝐬 grew concerned that Shigaraki might lose control due to 𝐒𝐿𝐴's actions, especially regarding the significance of the hand. Surprisingly, Shigaraki remained composed, retrieving his father's hand and placing it back on his face. He commanded everyone to refrain from attacking, recognizing 𝐒𝐿𝐴's value as a pawn. Acknowledging that 𝐒𝐿𝐴 would not willingly comply, he turned to the monitor and requested assistance from his MSTR. All for one responded positively to Shigaraki's plea. 𝐒𝐿𝐴 dismissed Shigaraki's authority, mocking him. Shigaraki ignored 𝐒𝐿𝐴's taunts and instructed 𝗟𝐬𝐬 and 𝗏𝐿 to put 𝐒𝐿𝐴 to sleep. Despite 𝐒𝐿𝐴's threats, he was unable to reach Deku, who was just out of his grasp. At that moment, a knock echoed at the door. A voice announced 𝗏𝐿𝐴, and suddenly, the wall that Spinner leaned against exploded as all might burst through. Before anyone could react, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 entered and ensnared everyone except the 2 UA students in his lacquered chain prison. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 attempted to activate his quirk but was swiftly knocked unconscious by an elderly man whom Deku did not recognize. The impressive display of power from 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 and the veteran 𝐼𝐼𝐼 was evident, showcasing their prowess as heroes. Villains, surrender now, there is no escape for you. Do you understand why? Because I am here, All Might proclaimed. Deku felt a surge of dread at All Might's arrival. He realized that the conference had been a ruse, they had been tracked all along. This was all part of a larger plan. All Might scanned the bar and noticed Izuku Midoriya, alive and allied with the League. It was clear now, he was the one behind the mask. Deku questioned how All Might could have known, recalling their limited encounters, the last of which had left his identity concealed. It was irrelevant now, he had been unmasked as a villain, and everyone would know to be on guard. All Might assured him that they would discuss everything later, once the current crisis was resolved. He had much to say. Just then, 𝐒𝐮𝐲 slipped through the door, ushering in the police. Deku coldly asked what All Might could possibly want from him. Before All Might could respond, Shigaraki's muttering drew everyone's focus. He expressed frustration at being tracked down, ordering 𝗟𝐬𝐬 to bring everyone, including the Nomu. A tense silence followed until 𝗟𝐬𝐬 admitted that the Nomu were not at the designated location. All Might seized the moment, declaring that they had underestimated the hero's resolve, the diligent police investigation, and their collective fury. This was the end of the line for Tamura Shigaraki. Shigaraki dismissed All Might's words, insisting that he would dismantle the society upheld by vague concepts of justice and peace, starting with All Might himself. He claimed this was merely the beginning. However, 𝗟𝐬𝐬 suddenly slumped over, seemingly incapacitated. Magna yelled in disbelief, questioning 𝗟𝐬𝐬's. Deku reassured him that 𝗟𝐬𝐬 was merely unconscious, explaining 𝐒𝐮𝐲's quirk, which allowed him to manipulate his body in extraordinary ways. 𝐒𝐮𝐲 confirmed that he had neutralized 𝗟𝐬𝐬, who, despite being missed, required a physical form to maintain his shape. He was simply taking a short rest. With 𝗟𝐬𝐬 incapacitated, escape was no longer an option for the villains. 𝗟𝗏𝐺 began naming them, except for 𝗟𝗶𝐻, whose true identity remained a mystery. He pressed Shigaraki for the whereabouts of his boss. Shigaraki, in a fit of rage, demanded they vanish from his sight, expressing his hatred for them. As he spoke, a dark liquid erupted into the air, and Nomu emerged from within it. 𝗟𝗏𝐺 questioned 𝐒𝐮𝐲 about the situation, believing 𝗟𝐬𝐬𝐬 to be the cause. 𝐒𝐮𝐲 clarified that this was not 𝗟𝐬𝐬𝐬's doing. Suddenly, the liquid burst forth from the villains' mouths, along with Baku. Realizing the danger, both Deku and All Might sprang into action. All Might reached for Bakugo, trying to prevent his disappearance, while Deku kicked Tokoyami away, fearing he would be caught in the same fate. Bakugo vanished first, prompting All Might to shout in despair as he was taken from him once more. He intended to charge at Shigaraki but redirected his focus to Deku at the last moment. Like the others, Deku also disappeared, much to All Might's frustration. Before he could dwell on his worries, several Nomu attacked him, biting and striking. He retaliated with a powerful move, shaking off the Nomu by spinning rapidly. Meanwhile, Bakugo and the villains found themselves in the ruined Nomu warehouse, gasping for breath. There, they encountered 𝐼. He expressed regret to Bakugo and turned to Shigaraki, noting his failure but encouraging him to keep trying. He had brought reinforcements, including Bakugo, whom he deemed an important asset. As 𝐼 raised his hand, he prepared for All Might's incoming attack, blocking a punch as the hero charged in. All Might declared that he would finally defeat 𝐼. 𝐼 acknowledged All Might's return, taunting him about his intent to kill again. All Might vowed not to repeat past mistakes, determined to rescue Bakugo and Deku and imprison 𝐼 and his league. The mention of Deku puzzled everyone present. What did All Might want with him? Did he think Deku had been coerced into joining the league? Ignoring All Might's words, 𝐼 unleashed a barrage of quirks from his arm, sending All Might crashing across the city and demolishing buildings in the process. He mused about his combination of quirks, planning to enhance it further in the future. At 𝐼𝐵H's urging, Shigaraki attempted to capture Bakugo, while Deku observed, deep in thought. Bakugo skillfully dodged the villains' attempts, but they were now willing to resort to force. Just as he created distance with a blast, a massive wall of ice appeared, separating him from the villains, except for one. Deku remained on the same side. Looking around, Bakugo spotted Iida, Todoroki, Yaoyorozu, and Kirishima behind a broken wall. Kirishima urged them to escape quickly. Bakugo chose to ignore Deku, aware that All Might was holding back due to his presence. Deku locked eyes with Iida, realizing that he must not have revealed his identity to the others, or perhaps he simply did not know. Either way, Deku's earlier assumptions at the camp seemed to be misguided. Shaking his head, Deku stood up and approached Shigaraki, who had just broken through the wall with his quirk. Sensing that Deku was not going to join them, Iida urged the others to leave him behind, reminding them that they were not permitted to engage with villains and that the professional heroes would handle the situation. As the others fled, Iida cast one last glance at Deku before following them. Shigaraki, filled with anger, confronted Deku, expressing his frustration over the escape of his allies. He swung a fist at Deku, who skillfully dodged the attack. Shigaraki declared that he had grown tired of Deku being a constant nuisance and that he would no longer heed Sensei's words. He intended to take matters into his own hands, recalling how Sensei had promised to assist him in achieving his desires. Shigaraki launched another attack, but Deku evaded it once more and retaliated with a punch to Shigaraki's face, his eyes burning with a quiet intensity. Deku expressed his own weariness of Shigaraki's relentless hostility, pointing out the jealousy that fueled Shigaraki's actions. Shigaraki's eyes widened in surprise at this revelation. Deku continued, revealing that Sensei had shared everything with him, and while he initially had doubts, the notion of confronting Shigaraki excited him. He warned Shigaraki to run away, as he had now made a formidable enemy. The rest of the league observed the confrontation in silence. Suddenly, All Might was sent crashing through the ice wall, colliding with several buildings. 𝐼𝐼 stepped through the newly created opening, commenting on Bakugo's escape and noting that it seemed Deku had made a decisive choice. Deku nodded, prompting a smile from 𝐼𝐼 beneath his mask. 𝐼𝐼 then turned to Kurojire's unconscious form and activated his quirk, sending everyone but Deku flying through the portal. Once that was accomplished, he placed a hand on Deku's shoulder. As he did, Deku felt a warmth envelop him. 𝐼𝐼 informed him that, as they had discussed, he would compete against Shigaraki and his league, both vying for supremacy. Only after one of them had defeated the other would the victor become the true successor of 𝐼. Deku opened his eyes, filled with determination, and vowed not to disappoint Sensei, promising to prove his worth. He then turned and ran, while 𝐼𝐼 intercepted another attack from All Might. All Might demanded to know what 𝐼𝐼 had done to Deku and what their conversation had entailed. 𝐼𝐼 responded, clarifying that Deku had chosen to align with them of his own volition, motivated by the society that All Might sought to protect. 𝐼𝐼 revealed that Deku had endured relentless torment for being quirkless, with Bakugo being one of his main tormentors. He recounted a particularly cruel incident where Bakugo had urged Deku to end his life in hopes of being reborn with a quirk. 𝐼𝐼 relished the shock and anguish on All Might's face as he continued, explaining that after All Might had told Deku he could never become a hero, it had pushed him to the brink. That night, Deku had returned to the same building where he had met All Might, contemplating ending it all. All Might stood frozen, horrified by the implications of 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿's words. He struggled to comprehend the weight of his actions. 𝐼𝐼𝐼𝐿 revealed that 𝐾𝐞𝐬 had intervened on his orders, bringing Deku to him. Recognizing Deku's potential, 𝐼𝐼𝐿 had invited him to join their cause, knowing he would not take no for an answer. Although Deku had set conditions, 𝐼𝐼𝐿 acknowledged that while he opposed killing, his hands were not entirely clean. All Might, still reeling from the revelations, was unable to dwell on them for long as 𝐼𝐼𝐿 struck him, sending him flying once more. As their battle resumed, Deku fled the scene, contemplating 𝐼𝐼𝐿's plans. After waking from the raid on the camp, 𝐼𝐼𝐿 had shared everything with him, including details about All Might's Quirk and 𝗏𝗏𝐸. 𝐼𝐼𝐿 had expressed his longing for Deku to be his successor, suggesting that he leave the League to confront Shigaraki and determine who would be chosen. At that moment, Deku had been uncertain, but now he was resolute and headed toward a location 𝐼𝐼𝐿 had indicated. However, his path was soon obstructed by 𝗟𝗏𝐻, who recognized him without his mask. Deku braced himself for a confrontation, searching for an escape route when 𝗏𝗏𝐿 suddenly appeared, delivering a powerful kick that knocked him out. Meanwhile, All Might and 𝗟𝗏𝐿 exchanged blows, creating shockwaves that did not affect Deku, 𝗏𝗏𝐿, or the heroes previously defeated by 𝗟𝗏𝐿. 𝗟𝗏𝐿 taunted All Might about the destruction he had caused in his pursuit of becoming the symbol of peace, questioning how it felt to stand over defeated foes. He prepared to unleash a powerful quirk combination, but All Might was ready this time. He countered with a Detroit Smash, forcing both of them back. All Might declared that he would not allow 𝗟𝗏𝐿 to fight without restraint, asserting that heroes like him always had something worth protecting. 𝗟𝗏𝐿 dismissed him, accusing him of toying with others, breaking them, and ruling over them while mocking their struggles from his throne. With a burst of speed, All Might charged forward, catching 𝗟𝗏𝐿 off guard. He proclaimed that he would never allow such evil to persist as he shattered 𝗟𝗏𝐿's mask, revealing the scarred visage hidden beneath. 𝗟𝗏𝐿 responded with a chilling admiration for All Might's words. Unfortunately, 𝐼𝐼𝐿 had heard it all before, from his predecessor, Nana Shimura. Upon hearing her name, All Might felt a surge of anger. He attempted to strike his enemy once more but was met with a weaker version of the quirk combination. 𝗏𝗏𝐿 caught him, reprimanding him for losing his composure and reminding him that he needed to stay calm to secure victory. 𝗏𝗏𝐿 taunted him, questioning how he could hope to win when he appeared so weak. He compared All Might's quirk to a flickering flame in the wind, suggesting that it was only natural given that All Might had found a successor to inherit his power. He claimed that All Might was merely fighting with the last few embers of his strength, which would soon be extinguished. The battle continued, with both combatants exchanging blows without relent. All Might landed a powerful kick to 𝗏𝗏𝐿's abdomen, sending him soaring into the air. 𝗏𝗏𝐿 sneered, mocking All Might for using a kick instead of his usual punches. All Might, determined to defeat his arch-nemesis, knew he needed to think creatively. 𝗏𝗏𝐿 unleashed his quirk combination again, this time amplifying it with additional quirks. All Might attempted a Detroit Smash, while airborne, but it only slightly reduced the attack's power. He crashed to the ground, feeling the full force of the assault. Despite the pain, All Might declared that no matter what he endured, his heart would continue to burn brightly as the symbol of peace. 𝗏𝗏𝐿, amused, acknowledged All Might's pride but hinted at a revelation that would shake him. He revealed that Tamura Shigaraki was Nana Shimura's grandson. The moment those words left his lips, All Might froze, his expression shifting from determination to shock. 𝗏𝗏𝐿 reveled in the reaction he had provoked, having waited a long time to share this news. He continued, taunting All Might about how both he and Nana had fought against him, yet had inadvertently contributed to his success. 𝗏𝗏𝐿 explained that the attack on the USJ was merely a means to bring All Might and Deku together, and that All Might had defeated Deku without realizing the implications. Taking advantage of All Might's distraction, 𝗏𝗏𝐿 launched another blast, which All Might barely managed to block. When the dust settled, he stood not in his heroic form but in a smaller, more fragile state, leaving the world in stunned silence. All across Japan, people were shocked by his appearance, yet they began to chant and cheer for him. In that moment, his physical form mattered less than his role as the symbol of peace and the only one capable of defeating the villain. Though All Might could neither see nor hear the crowd, he felt their hopes and encouragement urging him to persevere. That support rekindled his strength. He rose to face 𝐿, who hovered in the air, knowing he had only one option left, his ultimate special move. Gathering all his remaining power into his right arm, he stood tall. He proclaimed that heroes had many people to protect, and for that reason, they could not afford to lose. 𝐿, intrigued, mused that wounded heroes were often the most formidable. He prepared to unleash his Quirk combination once more, acknowledging that it would be impolite not to respond in kind. The two charged at each other, ready to conclude their battle. 𝐿 aimed a strike at the wound he had inflicted during their last encounter, but All Might skillfully dodged and closed the distance. With all his might he launched a powerful blow to 𝐿's face, declaring his move. The impact sent 𝐿 hurtling across the city, and when he crashed, he did not rise again. All Might had emerged victorious. The citizens watching erupted in cheers. Meanwhile, Deku stirred awake in a small prison cell, lying on a bench. He thought to himself that this was certainly one of the stranger awakenings he had experienced. His thoughts were interrupted when a police officer entered the room, introducing himself as Detective Naomasa Tsukachi and stating he had a few questions. Deku, feeling defiant, questioned what would happen if he refused to answer. The detective informed him that while it was his choice, there were methods to extract the truth that could be more forceful. He advised Deku to cooperate to avoid a worse situation. Deku challenged the detective, expressing confidence that he could withstand whatever they planned to do. Tsukachi observed the boy, realizing that this threat usually worked, but Deku was different. He explained that remaining silent would only worsen his situation, revealing that 𝐿 had been captured and that it was only a matter of time before they apprehended the rest of his group. Deku raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, admitting he was merely joking. He offered to answer what he could, clarifying that his loyalty lay only with 𝐿, not the League. Tsukachi, satisfied, instructed Deku to follow him to an interrogation room. Deku extended his hands through the bars to be handcuffed, and Tsukachi opened the cell to lead him away. Once they arrived, Deku sat in a chair, meeting Tsukachi's gaze. The detective began by asking how Deku had joined the League. Deku frowned, knowing this was a question he was not eager to answer. Deku found himself in a difficult situation, reflecting on the past. He had been discovered by 𝐿, who offered him assistance before inviting him to join the League of Villains. This revelation aligned with what Tokoyami had previously shared. Deku expressed his frustration, feeling betrayed that Tsukachi already knew about his connection to 𝐿. Tsukachi, however, moved on to the next question, inquiring about the reason behind Deku's fake death. Deku explained that he wanted to protect his mother from being dragged into his troubles. He believed that by pretending to be dead he could keep her safe while gaining the freedom he desired, knowing that few would search for someone who was thought to be gone. Tsukachi noted that this had complicated their investigation into Deku's identity and pressed on, asking about his role within the League. Deku clarified that he had been honest with Tokoyami, stating that he had worked on quirk analysis and stealth operations, primarily serving as an information specialist rather than a field operative. When asked about his presence at the USJ, Deku revealed that he sought revenge against Katsuki Bakugo, who had tormented him for years. He had confronted Bakugo and emerged victorious, after which he returned to Kurogiri and Shigaraki, convincing them to retreat due to their disadvantage. Tsukachi then inquired if Deku had approached UA or its students again after the incident. Deku admitted that he attended the sports festival to analyze quirks on 𝐿's orders. He encountered Uraraka and Iida there, but their interactions were brief and unremarkable. He recounted their meetings. First, with Iida during an internship where they fought against a Nomu, second, a chance encounter with Uraraka at a shopping mall, and finally at Island, leading up to the kidnapping incident, which he claimed he would have sabotaged had he known the true intentions. Tsukachi pressed further, asking about Shigaraki's whereabouts, but Deku had no information to provide. He explained that he was not privy to the League's other hideouts, as he had only been informed of what was necessary for his tasks. He emphasized that he had no sensitive information that could harm the League, as he had never sought to uncover their secrets. Frustrated, Tsukachi questioned why Deku had joined the League despite his limited knowledge. Deku responded that All for One's presence had been compelling. He sensed that the villain would not accept rejection. Tsukachi acknowledged the truth in Deku's words. As the conversation concluded, Tsukachi stood up, mentioning that someone else wished to speak with Deku. Concerned, Deku hoped it wasn't his mother. Tsukachi reassured him that while they had contacted her, she was not the one coming in. Instead, Eraserhead and Nizu entered the room. Nizu introduced himself as the principal of UA Academy. Deku recognized Nizu from a recent conference and greeted Eraserhead. Nizu explained that they were there to discuss Deku's future. Deku questioned the purpose of their visit, assuming he would be sent to a juvenile detention center. Nizu confirmed that confinement was a possibility but presented alternatives. Deku was surprised to learn that he had a choice in his fate. Nizu offered two options: serve time in confinement followed by supervised release, or participate in a rehabilitation program at UA, living there until graduation with the hope of reforming. Deku was taken aback. As a former member of the League, he had never expected to be offered a chance to join Japan's leading hero academy. A year prior, he would have eagerly accepted, but now he hesitated. Eraserhead noted Deku's contemplation, recognizing the weight of the decision before him. He acknowledged Deku's troubled past but pointed out that aside from a few incidents, he had not committed serious crimes and had shown restraint. They had spoken with Tokoyami and had been listening to the conversation, understanding that Deku had not chosen the path of villainy willingly. They were offering him a chance to change his life for the better. Eraserhead added that this opportunity was far more appealing than spending years in a dreary cell, especially since someone had witnessed Shigaraki's attack on Deku during the recent incident. This choice would also be safer, as he would be less likely to know your whereabouts or be able to take any action, Tsukachi explained. Nizu added that they had already discussed the idea with Deku's mother, who thought it was a wonderful plan and hoped he felt the same way. Deku hesitated, expressing a longing to see his mother first. Nizu exchanged glances with Tsukachi, who nodded and opened the door, stepping out with the UA staff members. Deku turned away, uncertain of what he would say to her. A familiar voice called out to him, and he froze, feeling as if his heart had stopped. His mother's voice echoed again, prompting him to slowly turn and look at her. Although he had seen her from a distance before, seeing her up close was a different experience. She had lost a significant amount of weight, resembling her younger self from 10 years ago. Her expression was a blend of happiness and sadness, tears streaming down her face. As she approached him, she broke into a run and embraced him tightly, crying into his shoulder. She sobbed, expressing how much she had missed him. Deku found comfort in the embrace, feeling a happiness he had longed for. He had wanted this moment for so long, and now it was finally happening. Overwhelmed with emotion, he began to cry as well, softly greeting her and sharing that he had missed her too. After a moment, 𝐒𝐮𝐬 released him and gazed at her son, tears still flowing. Deku met her gaze, still emotional from their reunion. She remarked on how he looked different, noticing his hair change. He explained that he had altered his appearance to avoid being recognized and pointed out that she had lost weight as well. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 looked down, revealing that she had struggled with her eating habits after believing he had died. Deku acknowledged that he had seen her from afar, which surprised her and made her wonder why he had stayed away. Deku understood her questions but felt unprepared to answer them. He was hesitant to share the truth about his experiences, knowing how she would react. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 pleaded for answers, her voice barely above a whisper, wanting to know why he had left and what he had been doing that night. He remained silent, unable to meet her gaze. 𝐒𝐮𝐬's soft plea for understanding made him feel torn. He knew she deserved to know the truth, but fear held him back. Gathering his courage, he decided to share his thoughts. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 was taken aback by what she learned. She felt horrified by the bullying he had faced, not just from Katsuki but from others as well. Anger bubbled within her at Katsuki for his treatment of Izuku, and she resolved to confront him the next time they met. Breaking the silence, Deku asked what would happen next. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 began to explain the situation, but he interrupted, acknowledging that he understood her feelings. He emphasized that a decision needed to be made. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽 insisted that he shouldn't have to think twice about it. She explained that UA was becoming a boarding school, offering him a chance to live there until graduation, which would allow him to pursue the life he wanted. She encouraged him not to let Katsuki deter him, mentioning that he might be the one who should be afraid. Deku smiled and nodded, feeling a sense of determination. He requested that they call in the others, raising his voice to address them directly, noting that they had likely been eavesdropping on their private conversation. The door opened and the three adults entered. They explained that they couldn't leave him alone with his mother. Deku rolled his eyes and declared that he had made his decision. He agreed to enter the rehabilitation program, but he warned them that he couldn't guarantee it would go as they hoped, reminding them that he was a former villain and would likely cause some trouble.